Alright guys, so the time has finally come to make this video about Subrosa's 2022 bike line. It's been a long time coming, and I was thinking I include a handful of these bikes periodically on the free bike recommendations that I decided I should probably make some videos going a little bit more in depth about them for people who get a recommendation from me and then they're like, well, is this actually a good bike? And they want to learn a little bit more about it. So this is going to be a super in-depth review on every single bike in Subrosa's 2022 bike line. I'll be honest with you guys, there's a handful of these that I cannot stand. I feel like they're overpriced and a complete ripoff, while there are some in here that I recommend quite a bit because of the value. Subrosa is able to offer incredible value in some of their bikes, while not so much value on their other bikes. So this is the 2022 Subrosa lineup. Let's get right into it. Now, the first bike on the list is the 2022 Subrosa Altus. And when I did this review about this bike earlier in 2020, I thought it was the Atlas, so I spelt it all wrong on my website reviews and looked like an idiot. But the Subrosa Altus, guys, this is not a very high quality bike. It's mostly designed for beginner level riders who are smaller and need a compact bike. It has shorter handlebars, a more compact frame, and again, it's lower quality high tensile steel. So the Subrosa Altus, this is the most affordable bike on Subrosa's lineup, and I really think that for the most part, it's a little bit overpriced. It's made from full high tensile steel, but Subrosa designed this bike to be more compact and small for a smaller rider who's literally just getting into the sport. If I had a little Dougster Bob running around, I would probably get them something like the Subrosa Altus because it's a 20-inch top tube with a 7.75-inch handlebar, which is really small. So the bike's small for a small rider. It makes it comfortable when a small rider is trying to ride it. Now, for a tall person, this is terrible. You're going to bend it, you're going to break it, and it's going to not fit you very good at all. Now, these are some of the most common questions that I get asked about the Subrosa Altus. The first one is, how much does it weigh? This bike weighs 26.2 pounds. It's going to cost you $389. You can easily upgrade everything on this bike for the most part, but be careful because some of the bearings are unsealed and that can cause a headache if you take the bike apart and ball bearings go everywhere. That's the only thing I'd worry about on this bike, but for the most part, you can upgrade it with any aftermarket part that you find that, that's an appropriate size replacement. It does come with brakes and they are removable, but the brake hardware that's mounted onto the frame is not removable. So if you do take your brakes off, you're kind of going to have like a sketchy look with the brake mounting hardware still attached to the bike. The higher end frames are going to come with removable hardware so that you can have a nice clean look on your frame if you do take your brakes off, but the Altus, they're just welded on there, so you can't do that. It's just a standard U-brake with a standard lever designed to stop the bike, but it's not the best by any means. You're going to need to choose between a 20.00-inch matte black and a 20.00-inch matte army green. Those are the two options that the Subrosa Altus comes in. This bike has a semi-sealed cassette, so it's not 100% sealed, and it has a 9-tooth driver, making the gearing 25/9, which is standard for most BMX bikes. So next we need to talk about the sizing. The sizing's super important because if you buy the wrong size bike, you're going to pull all your hair out. It's going to be very hard to trick. It's going to be very hard to maneuver, and you don't want to get the wrong size. This bike does only come in one top tube size option. It comes in a 20.00-inch top tube, and this is going to make it best for riders who are about 5'3". Now, if you have a thing called a BBB, I call it a big bike background. If you're experienced with riding mountain bikes or bigger dirt bikes and just bigger bikes in general, you'll be okay to get this bike if you're 4'9" to 5'3". The top tube is just one part of the geometry, and there are multiple other geometries in this frame that we need to talk about. They don't have as big of an impact as the top tube size does, but what they do is they have a slight impact on your style of riding. So for example, this bike has a 75-degree head tube angle, which is the degree that the head tube angle is. A steeper head tube angle is going to make your bike more responsive, while a more mellow head tube angle makes it more stable, more controlled. 75 degrees is right in the middle. So this is not super steep, it's not super mellow, it's right in the middle. It's a pretty standard head tube angle. The 8-inch standover height is about an inch smaller than average. 9 inches is about average, and the 8-inch gives you a lower seat post and a lower frame. So the frame's not all up at the top of your legs while you're riding. It just drops it down about an inch, which again makes this bike better for a smaller rider. The chainstay is a 13.2 inch chainstay, which is, it's technically average. 13 inches to 13.2 inches is on the average side. You can get longer chainstays, like closer to 14 inches, which are going to make the bike feel really stable, harder to pick up manuals. And then you can get the shorter chainstays, which makes the bike really responsive and really snappy. 13.2 is good for someone who doesn't have experience with different chainstays, so that they can figure out if they like it or not, and if they don't like it, what they want to change it to. Though I will say, with this bike being designed for a smaller rider, I think the 13.2 inch chainstay is a little bit long. Smaller riders on this bike might feel kind of frustrated that they can't pick up the front wheel as easily as they would have hoped. So a 13.2 inch chainstay on the grand scheme of things is average, but when you have a 20 inch bike designed for a smaller rider, that's a pretty long chainstay. The bottom bracket height on this bike is 11.6 inches, which is essentially how tall the bottom bracket is from the ground. So it's 11.6 inches up from the top, and that's about standard. 11.5 makes the bike feel more mellow, 11.7 makes the bike feel more snappy, so 11.6 is standard. It's not going to have any impact on your riding one way or another. Now, there's some other geometries that I felt like it's important to go over on here, like the fork offset, which is 30 millimeters. Now, I'd say 30 millimeters is more on the stable side. The most mellow forks you can get aftermarket are 32 millimeter, while the most responsive you can get are 15 millimeter or 13 millimeter now. So that, because of that range, that makes 25 millimeter about in the middle, right? So 30 millimeter is going to be on the longer side. The offset's essentially how far your front wheel is from directly under your head tube. 30 millimeters means that the front wheel is pushed out 30 millimeters from the center of the fork legs. And what that does when they're longer is it expands your wheelbase, making the wheelbase longer and making the bike feel more mellow and more stable, less responsive to steering and things like that. And I do think this is kind of important to have on a bike designed for an inexperienced rider. Getting something super responsive in the front end, if you're brand new to the sport, is kind of dangerous. And so a 30 millimeter fork offset on this bike is, in my opinion, pretty much perfect for what it should be, as it's designed for those smaller riders. Now, it has a 7.75 inch bar rise, which I talked about earlier. The industry standard is starting to become 9. Most people are riding 9, 9.5, or 10 inch bars. So 7.75 is really low. And again, perfect for the smaller riders. So the 7.75 inch bar rise is very good for these smaller riders who are getting into BMX for the first time. The crank length is 170 millimeters. That's how long the crank arms are. Now, I think this is a little bit long on a bike designed for smaller riders. I would have liked to see these at 165 or even 160 millimeters. 170 millimeters seems a little bit long. If you imagine a kid with super short legs pedaling around on this bike, and 170 compared to 160 does seem quite a bit longer. So just keep that in mind. All this is going to do, it's going to give you a little bit more leverage, but it's going to be harder to get a full revolution since the pedals are farther away from each other. The circle that the cranks are making is a lot bigger than if they were 160. I guess you'd say the diameter of the circle that the cranks do would be smaller. So therefore you can get more revolutions in a little bit easier on 160. Now, it's a real minuscule detail, especially to a small kid who's getting onto the BMX. Like, it's not that huge of a deal, but it's something to keep in the back of your mind, because you might find bikes with 160 millimeter cranks and a 20.00 inch top tube, which will feel a lot better. Now, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm just assuming the stem reach is 50 millimeters. 50 millimeter reach stem means that where the bars go on the stem is 50 millimeters away from the center of where the stem goes on the forks. The farther away your stem is gives you more of a mellow steering. So when you steer the handlebars, it doesn't react as quickly. And when they're shorter, it reacts a lot quicker. Mountain bike riders have really short stem reaches, while BMX gets a little bit longer because we like the stability that comes with higher speeds. So I'm assuming this is 50 millimeters, but I'm not 100% sure. So with all these geometries, we're going to get a smaller rider who's going to feel controlled and stable on the bike. I'm thankful that it's not a really responsive bike and a really responsive geometry designed for a smaller rider, because you don't want them to get hurt. You want them to learn control with the bike, even if it's going to make it a little bit harder for them to progress. So quality is important with how much your bike can withstand. Is it going to withstand big drops and big gaps? As this new rider who gets on this bike progresses, is the bike going to withstand to that level of riding or the weight or anything like that? So let's talk about the Subrosa Altus quality and if it's actually a decent quality bike. And it's actually not. Technically it's full high tensile steel. High tensile steel is the weaker metal that BMX companies use when making frames and complete bikes, essentially. You won't see high tensile steel on very many aftermarket parts, if any, because it's so weak. So it has a high tensile steel frame, high tensile steel forks with a star cap. The star cap inside the forks is a pain in the ass because when you tighten that too much, it just pulls the star cap up out of the forks. So when you tighten that star cap too much, it's going to yank right out of the forks. And I've had this happen a handful of times early on the bikes, and the only way to fix it is to buy new forks. And that is the most frustrating thing ever. So it's just a cheap way that they make the forks, it's not the best. All right. And then it has a 2-piece steer tube with tapered legs. So the forks are not very high quality. The frame is not very high quality. The bars are also high tensile steel, 2-piece bars, not very high quality. The cranks come in full chromoly with 8-spline spindle. Most complete bike cranks you won't have very many issues with because they're going to be full chromoly 8-spline spindles. Just know these kind of cranks are very heavy compared to the 48-spline aftermarket alternatives, but this is what you're going to see on most complete bikes, this chromoly 8-spline spindle. They're fully replaceable, but you shouldn't worry about them too much. Just know that they weigh a lot. And then the rims are made from single wall Rant alloy rims. Single wall rims are going to be a lot weaker than double wall rims. When you crash on something or when you crash on a spin, the rims, depending on how strong they are, will take up that impact. I was learning tail whips one time and my back rim smacked the ground so many times that it just turned sideways like that. And it was a single wall rim. So that's going to happen on those lower quality rims. Now, with this quality, it's important to know that if you're just cruising on the bike, you're doing manuals, you're doing wheelies, it's not the end of the world. It's under $400 and it's low quality, but it's a lower priced bike, so it's something that you're going to expect. If you look on the Dougster Bob app, you'd see that because of this quality, the bike has a 130-pound weight limit. So what that essentially means is that if you weigh over 130 pounds, you're going to break this bike fairly quickly and it's not going to last very good for you. If you weigh under 130 pounds, you shouldn't worry too much about the quality because you don't have enough meat on your bones to actually break the bike, even though it's a low quality bike. Now, the only cool thing that I saw on the parts package was the Rant Trill plastic pedals. These are aftermarket pedals. Even though that they're Rant aftermarket pedals, they're still aftermarket pedals. So they're a little bit better than the bikes that are going to come with like cheap Wellgo pedals or just a cheap junky generic pedal. These are going to be a little bit better, but that's really the only good aftermarket part that I saw on there. Some of the lowlights on the park package is the 410 chain, which is the weaker option for a chain. I've snapped a lot of chains and I just want you to be wary that this is a lower quality chain that might snap over time, 6 months in if you're pedaling a lot. And when your chain snaps, you hit your knee on your stem and it's just terrible. It's not a very good time. It doesn't have removable brake mounts, which I touched on earlier, and it has unsealed bottom bracket, headset, and hubs. So again, if you're replacing any of these parts, if your hub's going to wear out a little quicker than normal, your bottom bracket, if you take your cranks off, ball bearings might go everywhere. You got to be careful about that. And just know unsealed parts don't last nearly as long as fully sealed parts. So certain bikes are designed for certain types of riding. And depending on the type of riding you like to do, you're going to want to find a bike that fits into that. So let's assume you're under 130 pounds and you're the right height for this bike. Now let's take a look at what this bike is best for riding and if that fits into what you want to do with it. So it's going to score a 1.56 in street, a 3.33 in park, and a 3.59 in dirt. So the way that the geometry and the parts package is designed, this bike is going to be best for riding park and dirt, while it's not so good with riding street. Now, I did mention earlier that this bike is fully upgradable. So if you do want to buy some aftermarket pegs or some aftermarket hub guards to throw on this bike, that will boost the street score. Since there's a lot of things that affect these scores, those will boost the street score. So if you're real into riding street, you can buy universal hub guards, universal pegs, and throw them on the bike. Just make sure they're the right axle size. And then that can give you more street score. You can make all kinds of upgrades with this bike to make it better for dirt, for park, for whatever you want to do. But as it comes right out of the box, those are the scores. Now, the best upgrades, if I had this bike and I bought this bike and then I was going to upgrade it right away, the first thing I would upgrade is the wheels. Wheels on lower quality bikes are going to be really heavy and really weak. And that's the opposite of what you want. You want light and strong. So upgrading the wheels will cost quite a bit, but you can do so. And by upgrading them, you're making massive improvements to your bike. Its rotational weight, it's going to be stronger as you do drops and spins and gaps and things like that. So wheels are number one. Next, the tires, more rotational weight, and the stock tires that come on this are very heavy and not very good. You can upgrade it with some tires and then upgrade the bars, and you'll have a pretty solid bike after you make these upgrades. These are the three upgrades that I would personally do first. So I like the Subrosa Altus only if it's for a smaller rider who weighs under 130 pounds and who's just getting into the sport. If you're a lightweight beginner rider, you will enjoy riding the Altus as you start to learn your BMX skills. If you're an older guy, you weigh over 150 pounds, 200 pounds, you're taller. One, it's a small top tube bike. It's a cheap bike. Yes, it's very affordable. But I promise you, if you're too heavy for this bike or too big for this bike, you're going to end up replacing parts later on, and it's going to cost you much more than if you just spent the money on an appropriate size and appropriate quality bike. For, again, smaller rider, new to the sport, this is a good choice. Bigger rider, experienced, not a good choice. It's pretty simple. Now, the Subrosa Tiro is unique because it comes in so many different top tube options. This is a bike I reference periodically in other bike reviews because it's like, this bike comes in a 21.33 inch top tube, which is insane. This is the tallest top tube that I've seen on any bike, any complete bike. The second next biggest is the Sunday Dark Wave, which is 21.25. You can get the XXL Tiro in 21.33. That's insane to me. Other than that, though, it doesn't have very much going for it. It's fully high-tensile steel. It's not a very high-quality bike, and it's a little bit on the expensive side at $439. But I'm going to get really in-depth on it. We'll talk about the sizes. We'll talk about the quality. We'll talk about the geometries of everything. And you can make the decision if this is the right bike for you or not. Now, some questions I get asked all the time about this bike are, how much does it weigh? Well, it's going to weigh 27.8 pounds. How much does it cost? It's going to cost you $439 as of right now. The links in the description are set to take you to the shop that has it for the most affordable price because sometimes it changes and I don't want you guys to get ripped off. But as of right now, at the time of this video, it's $439. A lot of people ask me if they can upgrade it. And yes, this bike's fully upgradable. Just be careful with the unsealed bearing. One time I took apart my bottom bracket and unsealed bearings went everywhere. It was awkward and I never found all the bearings, and I don't want that to happen to you. You can upgrade all the parts on this bike. Just be careful when you take apart the unsealed parts. The bearings don't go everywhere. Keep an eye on that, pay attention. Other than that though, yeah, you can upgrade it. Does it have brakes? Yeah, so it's going to come with a standard set of U-brakes. The brake mounting hardware is not removable, so you're not going to have a clean look if you do take the brakes off, but it comes with brakes. It doesn't come with a gyro, but you can put gyro tabs on it because there's holes drilled into the frame for the gyro tabs. So if you do want to run a gyro, it's possible. You'll just have to buy that gyro separately. So the options that it has, there's a lot of different options. I'm just going to read them. It comes in a 20.5 inch matte trans purple, a 20.75 matte trans teal, a 21 inch black, a 21 inch matte trans red, and a 21.33 matte raw. There's a ton of options there, and that's a lot. That is a lot of options. The hub is a fully sealed cassette with a 9-tooth driver, meaning the bike has 25/9 gearing system. So now we need to talk about the size of the bike and make sure that this is the right size for you. You just heard me read off all those options, so the chances that this is not the right size for you is pretty unlikely. But it still could be the wrong size. I don't know. We're going to figure it out right now. So It comes in 20.5, 20.75, 21, and 20.3. Those are the options, and like I mentioned earlier, each size is associated with a certain color. The 21, you can choose between 2 different colors, but other than that, the other sizes are all tied to just one color option. So you can't say I want matte raw in 21.33. Wait, no, you can, because it comes in 21.33 in raw. You can't say I want matte trans red in 21.33 because it's only available in 21. You know what I mean? Okay, so for the 20.5 inch top tube, you can get this bike if you're 5'6" to 5'9". That's the height that you need to be to comfortably ride the 20.5 inch top tube. If you have BBB, you can get it if you're 5'3" to 5'6". You'll be comfortable on the 20.5 if you're 5'3" to 5'6" if you have big bike background. Now, for the 20.75 standard person, you can be 5'9" to 6 foot. Anywhere in between there, and the 20.75 is going to feel good for you. If you have a big bike background, 5'6" to 5'9". Anywhere in between there, the 20.75 is going to feel comfortable for you. For the 21, you can be over 6 foot. You need to be over 6 foot. Otherwise, the bike's going to feel too big for you. But if you're comfortable riding big bikes, you have a big bike background, you need to be over 5'9". Over 5'9", the 21 will feel comfortable for you. And then if you're on the taller end, even past that, you want to go with the 21.3. I'm 6'4". I should probably ride the 21.3. You're 6'8". You probably want to ride a mountain bike or something, but I mean, or the 21.33. You just need to be a taller dude for 21.33. It's pretty self-explanatory, but that's the size recommendations. Now, I want to stress, these are just recommendations. If you're 6'5" and you want to ride a 20.25 inch top tube, go for it. You're going to hate yourself, but go for it. All right. That's how it goes. These are just recommendations. If you want to get your own bike, you want to do your own thing, fine. But this is what the industry recommends your height to be to ride these top tube sizes. Okay, let's move on to the frame geometry. There are a lot of different geometries when we're talking about frames, and the crazy thing about Subrosa is they're all the same for the most part. From the cheapest bike to the most expensive bike, the geometries on the frame are pretty much the same. And that rhymed. That's crazy. So the 4 other geometries you need to worry about are the head tube angle, the chainstay length, the seat tube height, the standover height, and the bottom bracket height. Those are the 4 other angles aside from the top tube size that you need to worry about. Now, these angles don't have as a dramatic of an effect as the top tube length. The top tube length is one of the most important factors. These other angles just kind of affect how the bike controls, how the bike handles, and how it ultimately feels. So the Subrosa Tiro comes in a 75-degree head tube angle. 76 is really steep, and 74.5 is really mellow. So 75 is going to be right in the middle. It's pretty average. The standover height is 8.5 inches, which means the top of where the seat goes into the frame is 8.5 inches from the bottom bracket. Now, 9 is about standard. You can get them a lot taller, you can get them a lot smaller, so 9 is standard. This makes the 8.5 a little bit shorter than normal. This just gets your frame smaller, out of your way for tail whips, so it's not all up in your legs all the time. Just keeps it out of the way. Now, this can give you an issue with stability when you're pinching for bar spins or suicide no-handers. It's going to be an issue being 8.5, but it's half an inch. It's really not the end of the world. The chainstay length is a 13.2 inch chainstay length, meaning from the bottom bracket to where the wheel bolts on in the center of the chainstay is 13.2 inches. Now, if you slam your wheel, it's going to be shorter than 13.2, and if you pull your wheel out all the way to the back of the chainstay, it's going to be longer than 13.2. 13.2 is a pretty average chainstay length for most people, but for a really tall rider who's on a 21.33 inch bike and who's well over 6'2", this 13.2 inch chainstay might feel pretty small for someone who's pretty tall. And that's just something to keep in mind, something to pay attention to. It has an extremely long top tube option, but I don't think the chainstay length really matches that energy. So again, someone tall might loop out on this bike too easily. The bottom bracket height is 11.6 inches, meaning that it's the bottom bracket's 11.6 inches off the ground. 11.5 is pretty mellow, while 11.7 is pretty responsive. So 11.6 is right there in the middle. It's not going to affect your style one way or another. Now, there are other parts with geometries, and again, it's going to be the same as the other frame geometries. These will have a slight impact on how your bike handles and how your bike feels, but they're not as important as the top tube length. They're just, they're going to have a slight impact, and that's really it. So the fork offset is 30 millimeters. This is on the more stable side, which is what I'd like to see with a longer bike. This has the 21 and the 21.3 inch option. Having a 30 millimeter forks just adds some extra stability to the taller riders so they're not looping out on this bike all crazy. 30 millimeter forks are good. 9-inch handlebars are technically average just compared to what everyone's riding nowadays, and this is again good to see. A taller rider might enjoy upgrading these to 9.5 or even 10-inch rise handlebars, but they come 9 inches on the bike. It has 170 millimeter crank arm length, and again on the taller bike, on the 21.3, I think this is a pretty short crank arm length. Personally, I would ride 175 or 180, and this bike has 170. Just keep in mind that these 170 millimeter cranks are going to affect the revolutions of your pedal. So if you have really long legs, it might feel like you're just doing this because the cranks come around so much easier. The diameter of the cranks, the circle that the cranks make, the diameter is not as much. Whereas if you got longer crank arms, you'd have a bigger circle that you're making with your legs, and it might feel a little bit better. And this is all preference for the most part, but it comes with 170 millimeter cranks. The stem, I think, is 50 millimeter reach. This is how far the handlebars are from the center of the stem and the center of the forks. Having longer stem reach is going to make the bike steering more stable, so it's not going to respond as quickly to steering. While if it's shorter, bar spins are going to be easier, and it's going to be really responsive on the steering. So there's nothing too dramatic on this part package geometry. Really, it's nothing crazy here, but I do want to mention, if you are a taller rider, some of this seems a little too generic. And the only time I recommend the 21.3 inch Tiro is if someone's extremely tall and they have a lower budget. I'll recommend this to them. And if you're here because of that, I want you to know you might want to upgrade the bars a little bit and consider upgrading the cranks later on. Mostly because these cranks are 3-piece Chromoly 8-spline cranks. They're very heavy, and you can upgrade them with 48 spline cranks. It's going to feel nicer. And if you do that, get a longer crank arm length, because 170 millimeters is pretty short for a taller rider. It's considered pretty short. So we need to talk about quality to kind of determine how long your bike is going to last. I don't want you to get a bike and break it in a few months. The frame on the Tiro is 100% high-tensile steel. High-tensile steel is a lot weaker than chromoly. It doesn't last nearly as long, and you're going to find it on most low-end complete BMX bikes. The forks are also high-tensile steel, but they have a chromoly steer tube. So I don't know. It seems like bike companies do this. They put a chromoly steer tube in the forks as a band-aid for low-quality forks, and to be honest, it doesn't do anything. Maybe it tricks you into thinking the forks are chromoly. They're not. The steer tube is the part that goes in your head tube, in your frame. And it's kind of important to have that there, but not as important as your legs. Your high tensile steel legs, if you nose case a jump or you disaster a quarter, they're going to bend out. I want you, next time you're at the skate park, look at somebody with a low quality bike who's had it for a while, and I guarantee you their forks are going to look like a Harley Davidson. They're just going to be bent out. And that's because they're high tensile steel legs. So for a light rider, that's not bad, but for a heavier rider who puts the bike through a beating, that's pretty bad. The bars are also high tensile steel. The cranks are the Chromoly 8-spline cranks. Nothing wrong with these cranks except they're pretty heavy. They're not the 48 spline, and it comes with Rant single wall rims. You're going to want double wall rims if you're heavier or if you're serious about BMX, because they do take a ton of impact. You got to think about it. Your bike is rolling on these rims all the time. So the rim quality plays a huge role in how long your bike is actually going to last. So these are single wall. If you're taller, if you're heavier, I do recommend getting the double wall. These are not the best quality rims. I mean, none of these parts are very good quality, to be honest, but it's affordable. That's the deal here. You're trading the quality for the price tag, and you're getting a lower price tag on this bike. So some exciting things about the part package are the Rant Trill plastic pedals. These are technically aftermarket pedals, even though they're only Rant pedals, they're technically aftermarket. It has a Subrosa pedal steel 25 tooth sprocket. This is an aftermarket sprocket, and then it has a sealed integrated headset and a sealed bottom bracket. The disappointing things on the part package were the 410 chain, which is lower quality than the 510 chain or than a half link, and it has non-removable brake mounts like I mentioned earlier, and then an unsealed front hub. So you can do this test with your bike, or when you get it, set it on the back and spin it and see how long the front wheel spins. I've done this before, and I swear to God, if you have fully sealed front hubs, it'll spin essentially forever. If you have unsealed front hubs, especially if you've ridden it for a while, it collects dust and it goes while it's spinning. It's not very fun. Keep that in mind. I'm glad the rest of the bike is fully sealed, but the unsealed front hub is going to cause an issue within the first 6 months. I guarantee it. Okay, so in the Dougster Bob app, this bike scored a 2 in quality, meaning, well, 2 out of 10, you can do the math. It's not very good. And it does have a weight limit of 130 pounds. This is just a weight limit I came up with. The Subrosa doesn't say this weight limit. I say this weight limit because I'm tired of bigger people getting on low quality bikes and breaking them and then spending even more money upgrading them. If you're over 130 pounds, this bike is going to break a lot faster than it should. You want a bike to last you at least a couple years, and I don't think this will happen for somebody over 130 pounds. Now, if you're under 130 pounds and somehow freakishly tall, the Subrosa Tiro XXL is a great bike for you. If you just don't have the money and you're, again, very tall, the XXL is going to be a good choice, or the XL version. Just plan on upgrading it. Just understand this is low quality, low price tag, and if you stick to the sport for a while, you will need to make some upgrades. Now, some bikes are better for street riding, some bikes are better for park, some are better for dirt. Let's see where the Tiro is on the discipline. Like, what is it best for? So it scores a 1.3 in street, a 2.56 in park, and a 2.82 in dirt. So just based on that, it's going to be best for dirt and park riding. You can make upgrades to make it better for street, just like the Altus. You can add pegs, you can add hub guards, you can add whatever you want to it and make it better for one type of discipline or another. But as the box, it's going to be best for park and for dirt. If you bought this bike and you messaged me and you said, hey, what upgrades should I do on this bike? This is what I'd say. I'd say upgrade the wheels. These are low quality single wall wheels and rims and unsealed front hub. Like, just do the whole wheel set, upgrade the whole wheel set. They're not very good, and you're going to get a lot of benefit by buying new wheels. The second thing I'd tell you to upgrade is the tires. The tires that come stock on this bike are not very high quality, and it's going to save you a lot of weight when you upgrade to good quality folding aftermarket tires. And then the last thing I'd say is the bars. Mostly if you're taller, I think you should get a little bit taller bars. Now, I only ride 9.25, and before that I rode 8.9, so it is totally a preference thing. But in my experience, people who I've helped get back into the sport who are taller upgrade to taller bars right away because they feel more comfortable. They're not so hunched over. I've been hunched over my whole life riding bikes, so I'm used to it. But you guys who are not used to it, I say avoid that and get some taller bars. Those would be the 3 upgrades that I'd say. Now, to kind of give my thoughts on it overall, just unbiased opinion, I think this bike is too low quality for most taller riders. Now, if you're really strapped on the budget, you really can't afford a higher quality bike, you can make do with this. Like, the size is one of the most important things since everything is upgradable later. I'd rather you get this bike that's the right size for, over $400 than get a higher quality bike for the same price that's going to be the wrong size. You're going to see a lot more progression by riding the correct size than you would by riding a higher quality bike in the wrong size. So I think it's a little bit low quality and a little bit overpriced, but for some people, this is the best bike you can get. And most of that is dependent on budget. Just know you can always upgrade this bike as you go. And if you're smaller, you can get into something else. Like, if you're best for a 20.75 inch top tube, you can find a better quality bike for the same price. But for you super tall guys, This is probably the best you're going to get, especially in this price range. So that's the Subrosa Tiro. Let's talk about the next step in quality, which is going to be the Subrosa Salvador. The Subrosa Salvador has a handful of options, and it's a pretty sick bike, even though it's slightly overpriced. The Subrosa Salvador is one of the more exciting bikes in Subrosa's lineup because they add chromoly into the frame. It's still not quite a mid-level bike, but all things considered, it's decent quality. But the $500 price tag kind of drives me crazy. One of the things that I do love about this bike is the options. You've got the Subrosa Salvador XL, the Free Coaster, the Park. All of those different options will be covered more in depth in a different video. This is going to be just about the Salvador and the Salvador XL, not the Salvador Park and not the Salvador Free Coaster. Those have different scores in the street, in the park, and in the dirt. So we're gonna talk about those. There's separate videos on that, okay? Just search for it, or I'll probably link it somewhere. I don't know. But the Subrosa Salvador is a solid bike. A little bit overpriced, all right? Not full chromoly. These are some of the most common questions that I get about this bike. How much does it weigh? The Subrosa Salvador is going to weigh 26 pounds even. It's going to cost you $499, putting it in the same price range as the Kink Whip. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. A lot of people ask, can I upgrade this bike? And the cool thing is everything on this bike is fully customizable, fully upgradable as long as it's the correct size. Like the cranks are going to be 19 millimeters, so you can't just get 22 millimeter cranks and replace it without changing the bottom bracket. But that's normal things, right? It's not like if you get a Walmart bike, the one-piece cranks are going to be a headache, the bottom bracket's going to be a headache, and it's just terrible. The Subrosa Salvador is not like that. Everything's really easy to replace and really easy to upgrade. Does it come with pegs and hub guards? So sadly, the Salvador does not come with any pegs or any hub guards. You can upgrade them if you want with universal hub guards and, just standard pegs, but they don't come in the box. What kind of options does it come with? Well, you're going to need to choose between a 20.5 or a 21-inch top tube. The 21 is the XL version. I'm not going to make a separate video on that, but so choose between the 20.5 normal version or the 21-inch XL version. And within that, you get two different color options for each. So in the 20.5, choose between black and matte trans red. And in the 21, choose between black and matte raw. Well, it's going to come with a sealed Rant Party On cassette that's 9-tooth. It has a 25-tooth sprocket, making it a 25/9 gearing system. So earlier I mentioned the 20.5 version or the XL 21-inch version. How do you know which one's right? We're going to talk about the sizing, and I'll help you figure out which size is best for you, if any of them. So if you're between 5'6" and 5'9", you're going to want to go with the 20.5 option. If you have a BBB, this 20.5 option is good if you're 5'3" to 5'6". So with big bike background, get the bike if you're between 5'3" and 5'6". With virtually no experience riding a bike, anything like that, you're going to want to get the 20.5 if you're between 5'6" and 5'9". Now for the 21-inch option, you want to be over 6 foot. 6 foot and up, you can get the 21-inch. If you have a big bike background, this bike will be a good fit if you're over 5'9". So you could be all the way down to 5'9" and get the 21-inch if you have experience riding bigger bikes. And then there's 4 other geometries on this bike. These aren't going to be as impactful as the top tube size. The top tube size is going to be the most important thing that you consider when you're thinking about the sizes of the bike. These other geometries will just kind of affect the style of the bike and how it handles and how it feels. So the head tube angle is 75 degrees, steep head tube angle is 76, and mellow head tube angle is like 74, 74 and a half. And so this is right in the middle. The standover height is going to be 9 inches. And again, this is right in the middle. Now the chainstay length is 13.2 inches. And this might be kind of long for somebody who's 5'3" to 5'6". So if you have that big bike background and you go with the 20.5 version, it's still going to have a 13.2 inch chainstay, which to me, for someone that small, is going to be kind of long if you're a responsive technical rider. Now, if you have no idea what kind of style you like to do, then it doesn't matter. you're going to ride this bike, it's going to be a little bit harder to pull up and initiate manuals, and the back end's not going to feel super responsive, which is fine if you don't have anything to reference it to. But just keep that in mind. If you get this bike, you're struggling with manuals, that could be why, especially if you're a shorter person. But, you know, for someone 5'6" to 5'9" and up, this is kind of a standard size chainstay. Now, again, though, if you're on the opposite end of it, if you're way over 6 foot, this might feel a little bit small for you. So just a heads up. The last thing is the bottom bracket height, which is 11.6. This is pretty much right in the middle of what most bottom bracket heights are. It's not going to make the bike feel extra responsive. It's not going to make the bike feel extra stable. It's right there in the middle, so you don't need to worry about it too much. Overall, the bike, the geometry on all of Subrosa's line, I'll explain it for each bike, but it's about the same. The Salvador, the Tiro, the Altus, like for the most part, the frame geometries are about the same. The only thing that really changes is the top tube and the standover height a teeny tiny bit from some of the shorter frames to these frames, but that's about it, okay? Now there's other geometries on the parts package that we need to talk about and look at. These are gonna be just like the frame geometries. They have a minuscule effect on your riding, and you'll notice it in your style a little bit. So the fork offset is 30 millimeters. This is a little bit on the longer end. I'd say 26 is right in the middle when you consider there's a 13 millimeters the shortest and 32 millimeters kind of the longest that you can get in freestyle. That makes 26 about the middle. So 30 is going to be kind of long, okay? This is good for newer riders because you don't want something really responsive. It's going to feel uncontrollable and you might get hurt. So riding a 30 millimeter fork offset, 32 millimeter fork offset is good because it feels comfortable. You're not going to loop out real quick, or you're not going to snap the steering in the bowl and flip over or anything like that. Like 30 millimeter is good. Don't worry about it. The bars come in 9 inches. It's 9 inches whether you get the 20.5 inch option or the 21 inch option. On a 21 inch option, generally, like I said, it's for people over 6 foot. You're probably going to want some taller bars, so consider upgrading the bars later on. I only ride 9 1/4 and I'm 6'4", but the industry average, you'll have to find what works good for you, but generally most people over 6 foot are riding around 10-inch bars at the minimum. So just consider that, think about it. The crank arm length is 170 millimeters, which is, to me, it's a little bit short, especially for a taller rider. Now, somebody 5'3", 5'6", almost 5'9", this is good. This is a good average, but for a taller guy over 6 foot, these crank arms are pretty short. You can upgrade them to 175 or 180 if you're feeling extra crazy, but the 170 might feel weird for a taller rider. I'm 99% sure that the stem is 50 millimeters in reach. The longer a stem is, the farther away your handlebars are. It's going to make your steering more stable. It's going to make bar spins a little bit harder, but the stability that comes with the steering is what you want out of a stem, especially if you're just getting into the sport. You're not going to learn bar spins right away, so it's better to have a more controlled and a more stable feeling on the bars and on the steering. The last thing is the gear ratio, which is 25/9, like I already mentioned. So now we got the geometry, right? You know, the height that this bike is good for, you know, the geometries of everything else, kind of how it's going to affect your riding. Next, we need to talk about quality, which is a little bit more exciting than the quality of the other bikes in Subrosa's line, just because they add chromoly into the frame. So the frame is technically tri-moly. When you see tri-moly, it's not full chromoly, right? It's a fancy word for saying that generally the top tube, the down tube, and the head tube are going to be full chromoly, while the back end of the frame is high-tensile steel. For a lightweight rider, this isn't a big deal. But for someone like me, for example, I weighed over 180 pounds when I was riding when I was younger and had tri-moly frames. And I'd bend that back end. I was learning 360s or 180s, and that back end over time just tweaked over like that because it's not full chromoly. And when you weld high tensile steel to chromoly, where the frame kind of meets up there at the wishbone, you're sacrificing the integrity of the bike overall. I mean, I guess it's good to put chromoly in the front end because for the most part, the top tube or the down tube can bend if it's high tensile steel, and chromoly, it'll just snap at the welds. But still, Anyway, that's what the high tensile steel, that's what the chromoly does. This frame is not fully chromoly. The back end's high tensile steel. So if you weigh over 150 pounds, I would say be careful with it and just keep an eye on that back end. Make sure it's not shifting. Now, if it does shift, it's going to feel weird to ride, but it's not the end of the world. Like, it usually shifts and it's kind of funky. Like, your tire is going to be going in a weird direction, but you'll get used to it. I just say keep an eye on it because you don't want your frame to be all tweaked out like that. You know, you don't want that. The forks are high tensile steel with a chromoly steer tube, just like the Subrosa Tiro. The legs are high tensile steel, which is the most important part of the forks, in my opinion. This has a 2-piece steer tube. It's just not great, right? Especially on a $500 bike. I don't think this is anything to admire. Chromoly frame and high tensile steel legs. When you do jumps, when you do gaps, when you do anything decently big, you're putting pressure on your wheels. Okay. And when your wheels come down, they naturally want to flex out like that. And so when your forks are not super strong, they don't rebound back. That flex just kind of keeps flexing and flexing. And eventually your forks are raked out like a Harley Davidson. It's not very fun. So again, keep an eye on the back end of the frame. If you're over 150 pounds, keep an eye on the forks if you're over 150 pounds. The bars are full chromoly 2-piece bars. So this is cool. We get an upgrade on the bars from the other bikes. Bars come full chromoly. This is great. You don't have to worry about your bars bending, which on high tensile steel bars, the arms just go whoop and bend down. It's ridiculous. The cranks are 8-spline 3-piece chromoly cranks. These are good, but they're going to be very heavy. So if you have a bunch of extra money, you want to save some weight on the bike, upgrade something like the Rant Bangin' 48 or something better quality like the Odyssey Caliber or the Profile crank, something like that. If you're planning to upgrade it, you won't need to for a while, but as you start to progress, consider upgrading the cranks. You're going to save some weight. The rims are Rant Squad alloy single wall rims. So overall, we have a Chromoly frame. We have high tensile steel forks with a chromoly steer tube. We have full chromoly bars, full chromoly cranks, and then single wall rims. This is kind of the core component of the frame, and these are the most expensive parts to upgrade. So what I always recommend for you guys is find a bike that has the strongest core components that you can get. The strongest frame, the strongest forks, the strongest bars, cranks, and wheels, because these are going to be really expensive to upgrade overall. It's cool to come with a lot of aftermarket parts like pedals, stem, chain, seat, all tires, all that stuff, but they're not that expensive to replace. So I would rather you guys get a bike that has good, strong core components and pay to replace the parts package that comes with it versus getting a bike with not very good core components and then paying to replace the core components and having good part package. Does that make any sense? Anyway, that's the main components. Okay, so some of the part package highlights, we have quite a bit on here. The Rant Trail plastic pedals are Rant aftermarket pedals. The Subrosa pedal steel sprocket. It's a lower quality version. You know, you want alloy sprockets are a lot better, lighter, but steel sprocket's going to be a little bit heavy. Anyway, it's still an aftermarket sprocket. It's got a sealed headset, bottom bracket, and hubs, and then Subrosa sawtooth tires. These are the low PSI version of the Subrosa sawtooth tires, so they're 60 PSI max. I don't know any new riders who ride over 60 PSI, but once you get back into it or get a little more experienced, you're going to want tires with a higher PSI so you can pump them up and have minimal rolling resistance. These are going to squish down and they're going to feel really sluggish and slow when you're cruising around the skate park or on the street spots. But they're technically aftermarket, even though they're the low PSI. The low lights of this is the 410 chain. It's a weaker version of the chain. You want a half link or you want a 510 chain, in my opinion, at minimum, because you don't want to be pedaling around. You don't want your chain to snap, hit your knee on the stem, flip over. You're going to have a bad time. So especially if you're a lighter rider, you're not going to put very much pressure on the chain, but over 150 pounds, same thing. Guys over 6 foot who weigh quite a bit, keep an eye on this chain or replace it right away. It'll cost you $30 to get a really good chain on there. Keep an eye on it. It's low quality. Okay, so now we know all the quality, and let's kind of talk about the quality and the weight limit. This is a weight limit that I developed myself. This is not from Subrosa. This is just from me based on the quality of the bike because I weighed a lot. I mean, not a lot, like 180 pounds. I was 6 foot when I was, 14, 15, I feel like. But I broke a lot of bikes because of that, because I had no idea what this different quality meant. Neither did my parents. And so anyway, the Subrosa Salvador scores a 4.2 in quality. 4.2 out of 10. The Kink Whip scores a 7, just for reference. Everything makes up this 4.2 quality score. And so because of this quality score, I wouldn't recommend it for anyone over 160 pounds. If you're under 160 pounds, this is a fine bike for you. You're not going to be bothered by the Chromoly frame, by the high-tensile steel fork legs. You're going to be chilling. But if you're over 160 pounds, you got to pay special attention to the quality of this bike, and it's going to wear out a lot faster. It's not going to last you as long. So that's why I put that weight limit on there. The XL version, for the most part, I feel like people over 6 foot are going to weigh more in general. Like they're just taller people, bones weigh a lot. I don't know. You're probably going to be over this 160 or right around there. And so I would stay away from this XL version unless it's the only thing you can afford. But again, there's better options for $500. So 160 pounds. If you're under 160, I take back all the bad things I said about this bike. It doesn't apply to you. If you're over 160 pounds, be weary about it. All right. So if you're still watching this video, you're probably like, hey, this might be a good bike for me. Well, now we got to talk about the disciplines. There's street, there's park, there's dirt. There's a bunch of different things that people ride their bikes on. Newer riders tend to ride a little bit of everything, but maybe you have it in your head that you're going to be a park rider or you're going to be a street rider. So let's talk about what this bike is designed for. The algorithm in the Dugster Bob app came up with these scores based on a bunch of different things. So the Subrosa Salvador is mostly designed for dirt riding. This is going to be because of the bigger geometry and just some of the parts package items. It scored a 2.2 in street, a 2.56 in park, and a 4.1 in dirt. It scores highest in dirt. You can upgrade it. You can add changes. Like I said, this bike's fully customizable. So if street is your thing, you probably want to get some pegs, some hub guards, some better street tires. If park's your thing, you're probably going to want to get a gyro and lighter parts for it so that it's better, more responsive, things like that. You can upgrade it, but as it comes right out of the box, it scores a 4.1 in dirt, and it's going to be best for riding dirt jumps or pump tracks. Now, if I went back in time and I bought this bike and I said, well, what should I upgrade? I would upgrade the wheels first. Single wall wheels, you can save a lot of weight by upgrading the wheels. You can maybe get a free coaster if that's something that you want, but upgrade the wheels first. It's going to be expensive, but you're going to get a lot of bang for your buck out of upgrading the wheels. The next thing, the sprocket. Get a good alloy sprocket. It's going to save you quite a bit of weight, and it's going to be a lot stronger. And then the forks. I don't like the high tensile steel legs on the forks. Since the bars are full chromoly, I think the forks would be the next best upgrade. You're going to have a lot of benefits with upgraded forks. So overall, I do like the Subrosa Salvador. If you're under 150 pounds, it's going to be a fine bike for you. But there are a ton of other bikes that come in 21 inch and 21 inch or 20.5 inch options. There are lots of different options, and some of them are much better value than this bike. There are quite a few that are better value. $500 for a 4.2 quality score is just not very good. And someone over 160 pounds should really just stay away from this bike. Find something better in a 21 inch top tube, up your budget, or you don't even need to up your budget for some of these bikes you can find at the same price tag with almost double the quality score. You got to check out the Dugster Bob app to find those bikes because you just sort it by quality. It's so simple. Anyway, not a bad bike for someone smaller, but the value on this bike really is off. It gets a little more exciting when we talk about the park version or the free coaster version because they're designed specifically for a certain type of rider, where this one's just a generic bike designed for everyone within those size ranges, and I don't think it hits the mark on quality. Now I get 5 common questions about this bike. How much does it weigh? It's going to weigh 26 pounds. Okay. How much does it cost? Right now it's costing about $519 at the time of this video. All throughout the last year, that price tag on all the bikes always changed. So it can be different, but while I'm making the video, it's $519. Can I upgrade the bike? Of course. The Salvador Park especially is built so that everything's customizable, everything's replaceable. Just go to your favorite bike shop, Dan's Comp, Albies, Empire, buy some upgrades, and they'll easily replace this bike as long as they're the correct size replacement. You can't just like replace big cranks with little cranks. You got to make sure everything's the right size. Does it have any pegs? No. Sadly, the Salvador Park does not come with any pegs or any hub guards. Does it have brakes? Yeah, it's going to come with the Rant spring gyro system and braking system. It's a gyro, so now you can spin your handlebars 100 times without your brake cable getting tangled up, or tail whips, or whatever you want to do. Park riders, if they run brakes, they always run a gyro because of the amount of spins that you're doing with the bars or with the bike, and you don't want your brake cable to get tangled up. Now, they require a little bit more maintenance and they're a little bit expensive. So it's really cool that the Salvador Park comes with this gyro system. If you decide to take it off, you can, but the brake mounts, the hardware that the brakes go on, they're non-removable. So you'll have funny looking things sticking out of your frame. I don't know why you'd buy this park specific bike and then take off the brakes, but you know, some people do crazy things that you just don't understand. So anyway, it comes with the gyro system. This is great. And this is one of the things that makes it park specific. What options does it have? Well, you got to choose between one option. You only get one option with this bike. It's a 20.5 inch matte trans teal. What if you don't like the matte trans teal? Well, wait for 2023, find a 2018, a 2019, or just suck it up, paint it, powder coat it. I don't know. That's your only option. Now, a little bit more about the gearing. This bike comes with a Rant Party On sealed cassette with a 9-tooth driver, making it 25/9 gearing system. Now, one of the most overlooked things in buying a BMX bike is the sizing. So you want to make sure that this bike is the correct size for you. Now, I mentioned it comes in 20.5 inch top tube, and the recommendation for that is that you're 5'6" or between 5'6" and 5'9". If you're anywhere in between there, this 20.5 inch top tube is good for you. If you're below that, you're going to need a smaller top tube size. If you're above that, you're going to need a bigger top tube size. The only exclusion is if you have a big bike background. So if you're used to riding mountain bikes, you're used to riding dirt bikes, you're used to bigger bikes in general, you can be between 5'3" and 5'6" and ride the 20.5 inch top tube comfortably. Now, it's important to know this is just a recommendation. It's not set in stone. Like, it's a recommendation from the industry. It's a recommendation from me. It's a recommendation from everyone. But if for some reason you're super tall and you want this 20.5 inch top tube, go crazy. But I promise you, it's going to hinder your ability to progress. Like, I promise. It's going to make progression a lot harder. Now, the top tube size is, like I said, the most important and overlooked part of the sizing of the frame, but there are other geometries that you might see listed that you scratch your head. You've got the standover height, the head tube angle, the chainstay length, all those things, and they're going to have a minuscule effect on how your bike handles and how your bike controls. So I'm going to talk about the geometries for this Salvador Park frame and how it's going to affect your riding and stuff like that. It comes in a 75-degree head tube angle, which is standard for pretty much all of Subrosa's bikes. It's right in the middle. Steep head tube angle, 76 degrees, makes the bike more responsive by bringing the wheels closer together. A mellow head tube angle, 74.5 degrees. It makes your bike more stable by giving you a longer wheelbase and pushing that front wheel out farther away from the back wheel. This is right in the middle, so it's not going to have a huge effect on that. The standover height is 8.25, which is a lot lower than most of Subrosa's bikes in the industry standard. For complete bikes, most standover heights are about 9 inches, so that's pretty average. This one's 3/4 of an inch shorter, which gives you more clearance when you do tail whips, when you do no-footed cans, when you do cans. For foot tricks, it gives you more clearance because the frame's lower. There's not so much frame and seat up in your legs. This is specific for the Salvador Park version. The normal Salvador comes with a 9-inch standover height. So the Salvador Park comes in a 12.5 inch chainstay, which is very responsive. Most of Subrosa's bikes, including the Salvador and the Salvador Street, come in a 13.2 inch chainstay. So this is, over half an inch shorter. And what this does is it pulls the back wheel closer to the front wheel by having a shorter chainstay, right? Less wheelbase, it makes the bike feel more responsive, more snappy, easier to pick up into a manual. But for somebody who's taller or heavier, this could be hard to control. A shorter chainstay is very responsive, which has pros and cons. The bottom bracket height is 11.6 inches, which is, again, this is right in the middle of most. 11.7 is going to be responsive, 11.5 is going to be very mellow. So right at 11.6, this is in the middle. It's not going to affect your riding one way or another. Now, the other geometries outside of the frame, like the forks, the stem, the crank arms, they're going to be the same way. They're going to have a minuscule effect on your bike and how that affects your style, but it's important to know and important to look at so that you can prepare for upgrades or, just know a little bit more about the bike you're about to buy. So the fork offset is 30 millimeters, which I was surprised to see on this park specific bike. The 30 millimeter forks are a little bit longer than normal. It pushes the front wheel out away from the fork, giving you a wider wheelbase. So this could almost, you'd say, compensate for the shorter chainstay. The chainstay got shorter, but the forks are 30 millimeters, so they push the front wheel out. It just adds on to that. So generally, park specific bikes, you're going to see a 26 or even a little bit steeper on the forks, combined with that shorter chainstay, making it ultra responsive, ultra snappy. And on these forks, you just have the 30 millimeter forks. They're all 30 millimeters on the Subrosa bikes. They didn't change the forks at all. They're just, they mass produced billions of forks to put on their complete bikes, and they did not decide to change it just for the park specific model. The bars are 9-inch rise, which I'd say is a perfect fit for a 20.5-inch top tube. If it's a bike with a 21-inch option and there's a taller rider going to be riding on it, I'd say to upgrade them. But I think these will be perfect for you if you're between 5'6" and 5'9". Now, bars are a preference, and if you want bigger or smaller bars, go crazy. But the 9-inch bars on this is pretty solid. The cranks are 170 millimeters long. This is fine. I wouldn't get too crazy here worrying about the crank arm length because you're 5'6" or you're 5'9", you're anywhere in between there, and this is going to be good. You can get shorter crank arms, you can get longer crank arms, and all that does is that affects the revolutions of the pedal, like how big the diameter is and how long it takes you to do a full crank. So with a longer crank arm, it takes longer to get a full crank, but you're getting more leverage. With a shorter crank arm, you can get the cranks around faster, but you've got to put a little more effort into it, if that makes any sense. It's kind of a confusing thing. Nobody really talks about it, but these are 170 millimeters. So the stem is a Rant Trill front load. And compared to the other Salvador bikes, the other Salvador bikes come with a Rant Trill top load. And the difference here is that the top load stem gives you some rise. It puts your handlebars up a little bit higher. And this is good. I like how it feels personally, but park riders like to have a front load stem. The front load stem keeps the bars nice and level with the stem, no angle here, and it really makes bar spins a lot easier. I don't like how it feels for other things, so I don't ride one, and you can figure it out on your own if you like it or not. But I think it's important to mention that this is a front load stem instead of a top load stem, and that's how it's going to affect your riding. It's going to be down lower. The stem's not going to be popped up with the rise, and it'll make bar spins feel a little bit easier coming around. Okay, so that's a lot of information about the geometry, but now we need to look at the quality. How is this bike going to hold up to your riding? Is it going to break? Is it going to bend? Like, what's going on? So the main components are what I would call the frame, the forks, the bars, the cranks, and the rims. Those are your main components. Those are the most expensive components to upgrade. So I'd say buy the best main components on a complete bike that you can afford, and then upgrade them. Upgrade the parts package if you get a junky parts package. The parts package is everything else. On the Subrosa Salvador Park, it's a Chromoly frame. It comes with a Chromoly Toptube, Downtube, and Seatube, while the back end is high-tensile steel. What happens for heavier riders, in my experience, is that back end that's high-tensile steel will start to bend over time. You got to think about it. When you're doing spins, your wheels are trying to move the way that you're spinning, and the frame's the only thing holding them and keeping them from flexing. And when you have a weak frame, especially the back end, it's going to flex there where the high tensile steel welds onto the chromoly, causing your back end to tweak out like this. Now, it's really not the end of the world. Like, I didn't notice for 6 months on my bike. I was like, oh my God, look at that. It's all bent out. And I still rode on it until I could afford a new frame. But you want to pay attention to it. You don't want that to happen to your bike and just go unnoticed. Your frame's going to start feeling funny and you'll wonder what's up. So anyway, that's the quality of the frame. It's not a full chromoly frame. The forks are high tensile steel with a Chromoly steer tube. It's a 2-piece steer tube. Your high tensile steel legs take a lot of beating and they try and keep the front wheel in place. When you land and when you case jumps, your front wheel's trying to expand out and your forks keep it there. When they're high tensile steel, they're just going to keep bending out over time. And next thing you know, you're going to have a funny looking fork that's just flat like this instead of straight up and down like it should be. The bars are full chromoly 2-piece bars, 9-inch rise like I said. The cranks are full chromoly 3-piece cranks with an 8-spline spindle. Chromoly cranks, these are fine. You can get 48 spline cranks, which are going to be a lot lighter. These 8-spline cranks are pretty chunky, pretty heavy. So if you have the money to upgrade them, I'd recommend upgrading them, but good cranks are usually pretty expensive. The rims are single wall Rant Squad alloy. You want double wall rims if you can afford it. These single wall rims just don't have, well, they only have one wall holding the wheel together instead of two. So it's a lot weaker. It can't take a beating like the double wall rims. If you're lightweight, like if you're someone with a big bike background and you're 5'3" to 5'6" on this bike, it's really not going to cause a huge problem. But if you weigh like I weigh, all of these parts on here you're going to have a hard time with them except for the cranks and the bars. So some highlights about the parts package is the Rant Trail plastic pedals. These are technically aftermarket pedals, even though they're Rant pedals. You've got the Subrosa pedal steel sprocket. Steel sprockets aren't as good as alloy sprockets. They're a little bit more heavy, but this is an aftermarket sprocket and it's cool that Subrosa put this on here instead of a generic piece of junk. It's got a sealed headset, bottom bracket, and hubs. And then the low lights are the 410 chain. So the 410 chain is just a lot weaker than the 510 alternative. When you're doing a lot of pedaling, you're pedaling around the city or whatever, you want your chain to hold up. You don't want to snap your chain. You will cry when you hit your knee. I promise you, you don't want that to happen. So look for a shadow interlock chain. I think that's the best chain you can get, or a 510 chain, any kind of 510 chain. Now the quality overall, because of this quality that we just talked about, it's going to score a 4.3 in quality. And I wouldn't recommend it for anyone over 160 pounds. This is a weight limit. I just kind of came up with the weight limit based on the quality. This isn't from Subrosa, but I'd say be careful. If you're over 160 pounds, you want a better quality bike because it's going to last a lot longer. This bike for someone over 160 pounds is not going to last you long enough and you'll feel like you wasted your money, and I don't want that to happen. Now, if you're under 160 pounds, ignore everything because, well, you're not heavy enough to cause a bunch of damage to the bike, and the bike's not going to, get destroyed as fast as it would if you were over 160 pounds. Now, certain bikes are better for certain types of riding, and the Salvador Park is obviously better for park-specific riding. The Dougster Bob app, the algorithm in the Dougster Bob app determines how good each bike is for park, for street, for dirt, and the Salvador Park scored a 6.15 in park. This is due to some of the geometry and some of the parts on this bike. It only scored a 2.2 in street and a 2.56 in dirt. So clearly it's much, much better for park. Now, for some reason you want it to be better for dirt, better for street, or even better for park. Like I said, this bike is fully customizable and fully upgradable. So you can buy parts that are better for street riding or for dirt riding or for park riding and make it even better than it is. But as it comes, it's going to score a 6.15 in park, making it a park specific bike. Now, if you came to me and you said, what should I upgrade on this bike? The first thing I'd say is the wheels. You can get lighter wheels that are a lot stronger. It's going to cost you a little bit of money, but that would be the first upgrade. You're going to get a lot of value from that upgrade if you get a good double wall wheel set that doesn't weigh very much. The next thing I do is the tires. These are Shadow Serpent tires, but they're the low PSI version. When you're riding park, you really want to minimize rolling resistance. So you want tires with over 80 PSI and not a lot of tread so that the bike rolls really smoothly through the skate park. And these low PSI Shadow Serpent tires just aren't going to do it. So I'd upgrade those next. And then lastly, I'd upgrade the forks with the high tensile steel legs. Get full chromoly forks. They're going to weigh a lot less, and they're also going to pretty much last you a lifetime. You won't have to worry about them once you upgrade these forks, but they'll cost a couple $100 to get a good upgraded set of forks. So just prepare for that. These are the things that I would upgrade if someone asked me, or if I bought this bike personally and wasn't riding at the level I was riding at. Those would be my first three upgrades. So ultimately, I like this bike. It's one of the more affordable park-specific options, and it's pretty solid for the price when you consider a park-specific bike. You get the gyro, you get a more responsive frame, you get a bike that scores 6.15 in park. I wouldn't recommend it for anyone who likes to do any other kind of riding, but the specificness of this bike makes it a good choice. It's a lot easier to go with the Salvador Park for $520 than get the Kink Whip, which is going to be better quality, but upgrading it to get this park score will cost a lot more than it's worth. Like, you will have a significant headache getting the Kink Whip, which you couldn't even do without buying a new frame. That's, I guess, the main thing is this frame geometry is set up for park specific riding. And to replicate that, you need a new frame on any other bike to really boost the park score. So that's a hard one to do. And this one coming for, like I said, $520 with a 6.5 in park, this is a good choice. Now for the average person who doesn't really care for park or rides a little bit of everything, I don't really recommend this bike. I think it's overpriced, all things considered. But for park specificity, this is one of the most affordable park specific bikes you can get. The Subrosa Salvador Free Coaster BMX bike is a $530 bike from Subrosa. It comes with a free coaster, no pegs, no hub guards, and not the best quality. Let's talk about it. Let's see if this is the right bike for you. So these are the most frequently asked questions about the Salvador Free Coaster. So it's going to weigh 26.4 pounds, which is more heavy than the park version and then the Subrosa Salvador XL or the Subrosa Salvador. The free coaster version weighs significantly more because, well, free coasters tend to weigh a little bit more than cassettes, okay? How much does it cost? Well, the Subrosa Salvador free coaster right now costs $530. That price can change from time to time, so the link in the description is updated to take you to the shop that has it for the most affordable price. If it changes, that link gets updated, and if you find it cheaper somewhere else, make sure you let me know so I can update that link. Now, the next question is, can I upgrade this bike? And you're going to be happy to know that everything on this bike is fully customizable and fully upgradable as long as you replace a certain size item with the other appropriate sized item, right? You can't put 22 millimeter cranks on a 19 millimeter bottom bracket, but you can replace the cranks with any cranks that are 19 millimeter. You can replace the bars, you can replace the forks. This is fully upgradable, and we'll talk about which parts you should upgrade first at the end of the video. Does it have any pegs? No, the Salvador Free Coaster does not come with any pegs or any hub guards. However, like I said, this bike is fully upgradable and customizable, so you can buy universal hub guards and aftermarket pegs and throw them on this bike and it'll be grind ready. But as it comes out of the box, it doesn't come with any pegs or hub guards. The Salvador Free Coaster is equipped with Rant spring brakes. It's just a general Rant U brake. The hardware on the brake, or the hardware on the frame, is non-removable. So if you take the brakes off, which you can, you're going to have hardware still attached to the frame and you don't get a nice clean look like you might see on other brakeless bikes. It also has holes drilled for gyro tabs, but it doesn't come with gyro tabs and it doesn't come with a gyro, just standard straight cable U brakes. What options does it come in? Well, it only comes in a 21-inch matte trans blue, which is surprising to me. I would have expected it to come in a 20.5 or a 20.75, but the 21-inch matte trans blue color option is the only option you can get the Salvador Free Coaster in right now. The gearing on this bike is a Rant Moonwalker Free Coaster. It's a right-hand drive hub with a 9-tooth driver, making this bike 25.9, but a free coaster. So now let's talk about the sizing of this bike and help you determine if this 21-inch top tube is right for you. So the Salvador Free Coaster comes in a 21-inch top tube, and this is best for riders who are over 6 foot. Now, if you're like 6'8", 6'7", I don't know, man, BMX might not be right for you. You probably want to go with a 21.5 or even a 22-inch BMX, 22-inch wheels, 22-inch top tube. But if you're over 6 foot, I'd say between 6 foot, 6'5", the 21-inch top tube is good for you. Now, there are riders who ride this at 5'10", 5'11", and even 5'9", but these guys generally tend to have a big bike background. They have experience on a mountain bike or on a dirt bike or just a bigger bike in general. So going from, say, a mountain bike to a 21-inch BMX bike is going to feel good if you're 5'9", if you're 5'10", and you've been riding those bigger bikes. But for the average person who is just getting on the bike for the first time, you're going to want to be about 6 foot or taller to ride this 21-inch Salvador free coaster bike. Now, you'll see other geometries like the head tube angle, the chainstay length, the standover height, and these have a minuscule effect on the bike. The most important thing that you need to look for is top tube length. Make sure that you're the right size for the top tube length of the bike you're looking at. If you are, then you can look at these other geometries and kind of figure out how they're going to affect your riding. So the Salvador free coaster comes in a 75-degree head tube angle. A steep head tube angle is considered 76. It brings the front wheel closer, creating a shorter wheelbase because it's so much steeper, while a mellow head tube angle is like 74.5 or 74 degrees. This pushes the front wheel out farther from the back wheel, giving you a more mellow, longer wheelbase. It's going to feel more stable, more controlled. The Salvador free coaster is 75, which is right in the middle, so you shouldn't really worry about it one way or another. The standover height is 9 inches, and this is essentially how tall it is from the bottom bracket to the top of where the seat goes in. And 9 inches is standard on most BMX bikes. If it's shorter, you've got less seat up in your legs, you've got more room for foot tricks. If it's taller, it gives you more of a stability. It's easier to pinch, it's easier to grab the seat for certain tricks. So 9 inches is pretty standard. Now the chainstay is 13.2 inches, and this is essentially how long it is from the bottom bracket to where the wheel bolts on. You can adjust the wheel within that chainstay. So on center, the wheel is going to be 13.2 inches away from the bottom bracket. And this is okay, but for a taller rider, an extra tall rider, this might feel a little bit too small. You can get up to 13.4, 13.5 if you want something really long and really stable. And just wanted to give you heads up. If you're like 6'5", 6'6", this might feel a little bit small, especially if you run it slammed. So just keep that in the back of your mind. And the grand scheme of things, this is average. Chainstays are going to range anywhere from 12.5 to 13.5 inches. And so that puts 13.2 pretty much in the middle, but for a taller rider, it might be a bit more on the small side. The bottom bracket height is 11.6 inches, meaning that from the ground, the bottom bracket sits at about 11.6 inches. The higher this is, the more responsive your bike's going to feel since you're higher off the ground. The lower it is, the more stable your bike's going to feel since your feet are closer to the ground. 11.6 is pretty much in the middle of the two extremes that you would find, so it's not going to affect your riding one way or another. So that's the frame geometry, but now there's other geometries on the bike that you need to look at before you buy this bike. They're also just going to have a minuscule effect to the style of your bike and to how your bike feels, just like the other frame geometries. They're not as important as the top tube length, but they're important to look at so you can kind of consider things. The first one is going to be the fork offset. The Salvador free coaster comes with a 30 millimeter offset fork, just like every other Subrosa bike. Your fork offset can be anywhere from like 13 millimeters of offset all the way up to 32 millimeters of offset. So 30 is going to be closer to that 32 millimeter offset, putting it on the longer side of things. When you think about it, you're riding a 21-inch top tube with a 13.2-inch chainstay and 30 millimeter offset forks. That's pretty mellow feeling bike, and it's going to feel good for taller riders who would be riding the 21-inch top tube anyway. The bars come with 9 inches of rise, and honestly, I'd recommend if you're over 6 foot, which you should be if you're getting this bike, I'd recommend that you get some taller bars as soon as you start to upgrade parts. 9 inches is, like I said, it's pretty standard, just like the standover height. It's a standard thing, but for a taller rider, you'll probably want taller bars. It's going to relieve your back pain. It's going to give you more control over the bike, but this is a big preference thing. I don't ride super tall bars and I'm 6'4", so you've got to figure out what you like, but just based off of what I see with taller riders who are getting into the sport, who aren't used to it, they're going to want a taller handlebar. The crank arm length on this bike is 170 millimeters, just like the whole rest of their lineup. This is right in the middle of the two extremes that you can find. You can get 160 millimeter, you can get 180 millimeter, so the 170 is right in the middle. With a longer crank arm, you've got bigger revolutions. You know, the diameter of the circle that your cranks make when you pedal is going to be a lot bigger with a bigger crank arm length. and it makes it a little bit easier to pedal, because you have more leverage, but it's harder to get a full revolution around. You're not going to pedal as fast as you would on 160 millimeter cranks. This is something that you just got to try different things to see what feels right, but generally for a taller rider, longer crank arms is the way to go. And so I think it's interesting that they have 170 millimeter crank arms on a 21-inch bike that's kind of designed for, well, taller riders. But 170 millimeter, if you hate it, if you hate how it pedals, that's probably why you might enjoy getting some bigger crank arms. I'm 99% sure that the stem is a 50 millimeter offset stem. When you have a really long offset, it gets your bars farther away from your forks and farther away from your frame, giving you a more slow and stable steering response, where a shorter stem gives you a more responsive steering. A shorter stem makes bar spins easier, but you sacrifice control to get that easier bar spin. I'm 99% sure, like I said, that this is a 50 millimeter stem, but I'm not 100% sure. And it's a front load stem, which is interesting because the front load stem came on the Park, but a top load stem comes on the normal Salvador and the Salvador XL version. So they kept the front load stem on this taller one, which doesn't give you the same amount of rise. And if it's a 21-inch bike, you're 6 foot plus riding this bike on 9-inch handlebars, you would probably want a top load stem or taller handlebars or a combination of both to get those bars up a little bit higher. The Salvador Free Coaster comes with the front load stem, which has no rise. Those bars are going to feel pretty low for you. Now we need to look at the quality of the bike and determine if this is a good quality for you. The frame is a Chromoly Toptube, Downtube, and Seatube. So the head tube and the back end of the bike are high-tensile steel, and this is not very good for a heavier rider because that back end of the bike tends to bend and break over time, especially where the high-tensile steel welds up to chromoly. That's just not a very strong weld, and as you do spins over time, your back end's going to shift and tweak like that. It's not very good. You're going to notice it one day. You'll be putting on your back wheel and you'll look and you'll say, whoa, why is my chainstay like this? It's just something that happens on Chromoly bikes over time. Pay attention to it, be wary about it, and get ready to upgrade your frame as soon as you start to see that happening. Now the forks are high tensile steel forks with a 2-piece chromoly steer tube. Having a chromoly steer tube does technically make the forks a little bit stronger, but I'd rather see chromoly legs. The legs are what take the beating. They're holding the front wheel in place, and over time with impact and with cases, the legs on your fork are going to just start to tweak out and you're going to have crazy offset forks because they bent over time. So again, keep an eye on it. I'm not saying this to like deter you from the bike, but it's just something that happens with high tensile steel. It's not as strong as chromoly and it bends over time. So your fork legs are going to bend despite having a chromoly steer tube. But we don't have high tensile steel in the bars. They're full chromoly 4-piece handlebars. Now 4-piece handlebars, this is a unique one to the Salvador lineup because the Park and the Salvador XL come with 2-piece bars. 4-piece bars just mean the construction of the handlebars. They're made up with 4 pieces of metal instead of 2. They have a more rigid and rough feeling. They don't absorb impact as easily as 2-piece bars do, but you also don't get the same amount of flex that you do when you're pumping with 2-piece bars. You can really kind of feel it flex, whereas the 4-piece bars are just really solid, really rigid. They're preferred by street riders, but it's honestly, it's a preference thing. You won't be able to feel the difference in the tubing very much, but you will be able to tell how it looks. So if you like the look of 4-piece bars, this is a good pro for you. If you hate the look of 4-piece bars, it's a pretty big con. The cranks are full chromoly 3-piece cranks with 170 millimeter crank arms. They're 8 spline cranks, so they're not the worst cranks, but they're also not the best. You're going to want to upgrade to 48 spline cranks eventually, just because they're going to be a lot lighter. The 8 spline cranks are pretty chunky, you'd say. They're just heavy. You'll get a lot of value by upgrading the cranks, but cranks are expensive, like close to $200. So you don't need to upgrade them right away. I'm just saying when you go to upgrade stuff, consider the cranks because these will last quality-wise. They'll last for quite a while, but they're so heavy. They're so heavy. The rims on the Salvador Free Coaster are Rant Squad alloy single wall rims. Honestly, if you're over 6 foot, you're going to weigh a lot and you want to have double wall rims. Single wall rims are fine for kids and smaller riders, but for a bigger rider, they're just not going to last very long. Double wall rims have 2 walls in the makeup of the rim, where single wall rims just have 1 wall, right? It's pretty revolutionary. But the double wall rims really are more than twice as strong. Like, you could say twice as strong because 2 walls, 2 is twice as much as 1, but they're way more than twice as strong. It's crazy. It's hard to think of, but you really, really want double wall rims if you're progressing to a level of riding where you're doing drops, you're doing gaps, or even tricks. What I don't want to happen is you guys to get single wall rims and have them get destroyed. The 2-chamber makeup of the double wall rims, keep those rims in place, keep them sturdier so that they can withstand a lot more. So some of the highlights on this bike is the Rant Trail plastic pedals. These are plastic pedals from Rant. They're not the best quality, but they are technically aftermarket. It's going to come with the Subrosa pedal sprocket. This is a steel 25 tooth sprocket. It's not as good as an alloy sprocket, but it is an aftermarket sprocket. So good job, Subrosa. It's got a sealed headset, bottom bracket, and hubs. And then it comes with Subrosa sawtooth tires. Now, these are the lower PSI sawtooth tires. For street riding, the PSI doesn't really matter that much. Now, the only real low light on the parts package here is the 410 chain. The better quality Subrosa bikes get the Shadow interlock chain, which is one of the best chains money can buy. But if you are taller, you're bigger, you want to get a 510 chain at least. This 410 chain is not going to last you very long. And next thing you know, you're going to be flying through the air because your chain snapped, and we don't want that to happen. So if you get the Dougster Bob app, you can compare this bike to other different bikes and see how it ranks in quality, but it only scored a 4.2 in quality. Overall, 4.2 out of 10. It's not very good quality, but it's also not the worst. There's much worse options out there. Because of this 4.2 quality score, I wouldn't recommend the bike to anyone who weighs over 160 pounds. This is a weight limit provided by the Dougster Bob app. It's not a weight limit from Subrosa. They don't say any weight limit, but I promise you guys, over time, if you weigh over 160 pounds, this bike is going to break a lot faster than you would have hoped. There's different bikes in the scoring system that don't have a weight limit or have a 180 pound weight limit. And so you just got to find those bikes based on your weight. I don't know what your weight is. You know what your weight is, but I really would urge you against buying this bike if you're over that 160 pound weight limit. Now, certain bikes are better for certain styles of riding, and you need to find a bike that aligns with the type of riding that you want to do. The Salvador Free Coaster is actually best for dirt riding, despite you thinking it should be for street riding. I disagree with that. I think it's best for dirt riding. The Dougster Bob app thinks it's best for dirt riding, and this is mostly due to the standard oversized geometry that Subrosa applies to pretty much every single bike it makes, but they didn't add anything here to make it street specific except the Free Coaster. So it has a 2.89 street score, a 2.56 park score, and a 3.59 dirt score. There you go. There you go. Now, remember when I said earlier this bike is fully upgradable and fully customizable? You can upgrade this bike and customize it however you see fit. You don't have to get it and ride dirt, but as it comes right out of the box, it is going to be better for dirt riding. If you want to ride street, throw some pegs on it. If you want to ride park, throw a gyro on it. There's different upgrades you can do, but it comes for dirt, which is weird. You kind of let us down, Subrosa. So if I had to choose upgrades for this bike, the first one would be wheels. This is one that I recommend for pretty much every single bike around this level. You can get good wheel sets that don't weigh very much, that come with double wall rims, and you're going to see a big increase in quality on your bike. It's going to feel smoother, it's going to feel lighter, it's going to be stronger, and that's what you want. Wheel sets tend to be pretty expensive, but you're going to get a lot of value out of that upgrade. If you do upgrade the wheels, that'd be one of the first ones that I would do, just because of how much of an impact on your bike and your style it's going to have. The next one would be pegs and hub guards, because to me, this bike should be designed for street riding. It should score a lot higher on street, and it should come for street right out of the box. Most people like to ride street with a Free Coaster, and getting pegs and getting hub guards, you can have a better time riding street. How do you do feebles or double pegs without any pegs? Like, that's a big part of street riding. Manuals, 180s, feeble manuals, feeble up manual bar, like all these things, fakie feeble, fakie manual. There's so many things you're going to need the pegs for. So it doesn't come with pegs. That would be my second upgrade for sure. And my third upgrade would be forks. I'm pretty disappointed in these 50% high tensile steel forks. The last thing I want you to do is hit a handrail, come up short, nose case, bend your forks in, and get hurt. Upgrade the forks. Now, these are pretty expensive upgrades except the pegs and hub guards. But by doing so, you're a couple steps closer to having a fully custom BMX bike, and that's the way to go. You buy a complete bike for $500. Over the next couple years, you spend another $1,000 on parts, and now you've got a fully custom BMX bike that is perfectly fitted for you, looks cool, rides cool, and everything. So to be honest, I don't really recommend this bike. There's a very low chance that this was on your free bike recommendation. It's just, to me, as a 21-inch BMX bike, for $540, the quality isn't really good enough for any rider who could ride it. Most people over 6 foot, most people around 6 foot are going to weigh pretty close to that weight limit, if not more. And you can get much better bikes for close to the same price. Now, the Kink Switch is about $70 more. It's a 20.75 inch top tube, but it has a free coaster. Or your next free coaster option would be the Kink Gap free coaster, which is only available in a 20.5. So I guess for a tall person, this is the most affordable free coaster BMX bike you can get, but I don't think the quality is there to justify this price tag. I don't know. I'd still recommend it for a few people. Like, it just depends on different things, but not very often. I think you can get a better bike for the money or spend a little bit more and get a much better bike. But overall, I don't really recommend this one. The Subrosa Salvador Park, good. This one, it doesn't really fulfill its duty, I don't think. Okay, so that's the Subrosa Salvador free coaster. Let's talk about the Subrosa Letum. The Subrosa Letum is probably my personal favorite BMX bike in Subrosa's lineup. This bike's a little bit over $600, but it comes with 4 pegs, 4 hub guards, and it's a street machine. I love that it has a purpose and it's built specifically for a certain type of riding. This is a pretty good value BMX bike, and the quality's everything that you need as a mid-level rider. Okay, the frequently asked questions that I get about this bike. The first one is, how much does it weigh? The Subrosa Letum is going to weigh 28.4 pounds. Because of the pegs and because of the hub guards, those add a lot of weight to the bike and make it a pretty heavy bike. The next question is, how much does it cost? As of right now, the bike's going to cost you $629. The prices changed a lot throughout 2021 and through 2022, but as of right now, it's $630. The link in the description is updated regularly to take you to the bike shop that has this bike in stock for the best price. So it might change, but right now $630. And a lot of people ask me, can I upgrade this bike? And you'll be happy to know this bike is fully upgradable, fully customizable, as long as you're replacing it with similar sized parts. And what I mean by that is that you need to make sure that, say you've got 19 millimeter cranks on the bike, you can't just throw 22 millimeter cranks in there without replacing the bottom bracket and just little things like that. But for the most part, everything is fully upgradable. Just make sure it's the right size for what you've got and that you don't need to buy anything else to upgrade that part. Does that make any sense? The next question is, does it have any pegs? Like I mentioned earlier, this bike does have 4 pegs and 4 hub guards. Comes right with the bike. You don't have to buy any upgrades, so that saves you like, $60 to $80. Does it have any brakes? It comes with a standard Rant spring brake U-brake with a straight cable. The brake mounts on this bike are removable, so if you take the brakes off like most people plan to, you can get a nice clean looking frame without the brake mounting hardware attached to it. It's a pretty cool feature, and this is the cheapest bike on Subrosa's lineup to do it. The Salvador and the Tiro and the Altus, they don't do that, but this bike does, so you can have a nice clean brakeless look. What options does this bike have? Well, it only comes in a 20.75 inch top tube, but you can choose between two different color options. You can choose between a matte trans black fade or a matte trans red fade. I think the matte trans red fade looks cool, but a lot of people are wishy-washy about the colors. Some people love them and some people hate them. I think the matte trans red fade is cool, but not necessarily the matte trans black. It doesn't look black at all. This bike is equipped with a Rant Moonwalker free toaster. It's a right-hand drive free toaster and with 9-tooth driver. So this makes the bike 25.9, comes with a free coaster, and that's pretty cool because most bikes don't. So now let's talk about the sizing of the bike and make sure that this bike is going to fit you perfectly based on your height. Like I said, it comes in a 20.75 inch top tube, and that's going to be best for riders who are between 5'9" and 6 foot. Now, if you have a BBB, a big bike background, and you've ridden mountain bikes or dirt bikes and just bigger bikes in general, you're used to how a bike feels and you're used to a bigger bike, you could get this bike if you're between 5'6" and 5'9". If you're between those sizes, the 20.75 inch top tube will be fine for you if you're experienced with riding bigger bikes. Now, there are other angles and geometries on this frame, and it's important to know what they do, even though they're not as important as the top tube size. The top tube size is probably the most important. You should really look at that and make sure that the size top tube that you're going to get is the right size for you. And then these other geometries just kind of affect how the bike feels and how it handles. So we're going to talk about the head tube angle, which is 75 degrees. The steepest head tube angle you can get is around 76, while the most mellow is around 74. And that puts 75-degree head tube angle on the Letum right in the middle. With a steeper head tube angle, your head tube angle is raked forward so that your front wheel is closer to your back wheel. This gives you a shorter wheelbase and a more snappy and a more responsive feeling bike, while a mellow head tube angle pulls your front wheel away from the back wheel, giving you a more mellow and stable feeling bike. So right in the middle here, this isn't going to affect your style or how the bike feels one way or another. It's going to have a 9-inch standover height, which is average. A shorter standover height is going to make the bike out of your way for feet tricks like no-footed cans or tail whips, while a taller standover height gives you more seat up in your legs to pinch better for tail whips or to grab the seat for toboggans. The chainstay is 13.2 inches. For the most part, this is average or a little bit over average. Your chainstay is how far your back wheel is from your bottom bracket. A longer chainstay increases the wheelbase of your bike, just like a more mellow head tube angle. With a longer wheelbase, you've got a more stable and a more controlled feeling bike. So a longer chainstay makes the bike more stable and controlled, while a shorter chainstay makes the bike more snappy and more responsive. Now, again, this being right here in the middle, you're not going to notice too much of a difference one way or another. The bottom bracket height is 11.6, which is very average. 11.5 is the more mellow bottom bracket height, while 11.7 is the more responsive. It's essentially how tall the bottom bracket is off the ground. So a lower bottom bracket height makes the bike feel more stable because it's closer to the ground, while in 11.7, something taller gets you higher up off the ground and makes the bike more responsive. 11.6, right there in the middle, you're not really going to notice a difference with it. Now, much like the frame geometry, we have other geometries on this bike that will affect the style and the feel of the bike. The first one is the fork offset. The fork offset on the Subrosa Letum is a 30mm offset. This is pretty stable. It's more on the stable side of things, and just like a mellow head tube angle, it pushes your front wheel away from your back wheel. The offset of the forks is how far away your front wheel is from directly under the fork leg, and a longer offset makes the wheelbase bigger and gives you a more stable and a more mellow feeling bike. So I was kind of surprised to see 30mm fork offset here, but they just didn't change the offset of the forks on really any of their bikes. So this is what every single bike has, and it's not any different for the Letum. Now, if nose manuals and responsive bull riding is something that's going to be really important to you on the Letum, you're going to want to consider getting a 26mm fork or even something really crazy like a 13mm. It's a lot of preference, but a steeper fork is going to give you a more responsive bike, but it's going to make nose manuals a lot easier to hop into, a little bit harder to control, but really easy to initiate. So keep that in mind. I know a lot of street riders, this is a street specific bike, and a lot of street riders really aspire to get nose manuals, and these these 30mm forks might make that pretty difficult. The bar height's 9 inches, which is pretty average, and while this is a 20.75-inch top tube, it's for riders that are 5'9" to 6 foot. I wouldn't see you needing to change this very much unless it's uncomfortable. If the 9 inches feel really small, get some bigger bars. If it feels really tall, get some smaller bars, but this is kind of a good reference point for a lot of new riders or people who are coming back into the sport to feel this bike out and see how it feels, how it rides, and so on and so forth. The crank arm length is 170mm, which is dead in the middle of the other crank arm options you can get. You can choose 160mm crank arms up to 180mm crank arms, and it's just how long the crank arm is. The longer your crank arm is, the bigger the diameter of the circle that your cranks are creating becomes, making your pedal longer, making it longer to get a full pedal around with a longer crank arm, while a shorter crank arm makes the pedal quicker to come around. So this is something you'll have to play with and see what you like. For smaller riders, I think it's best to get 160mm crank arm length, but for taller riders or average size riders, it becomes a little bit more of a preference. So if you're riding this and you're like, man, it feels so weird to pedal, maybe you want some longer crank arms so it doesn't come around as quick or so that you have more leverage. You'll just have to play with this and see what you like for crank arm length. So the stem has a 48mm reach and an 8.5mm rise. Having a longer reach pulls the bars away from the frame, making it more stable when you're initiating steering. Having a shorter stem reach brings the bars closer to the frame. It makes bar spins easier and it makes the steering a lot more responsive. Then 48 is technically on the closer side, so you're going to have a more responsive steering with this shorter stem. It's got an 8.5mm rise, which is essentially how high the bars are from the center of the stem. Usually you see a lot of rise in a top load stem. This is a front load stem, and so this is only a tiny bit of rise. It's virtually non-existent. It's pretty much right where it should be, but popped up just a little bit. You're not going to notice a big height increase because of this rise on the stem. If it was a top load stem with a 20-something millimeter rise, you might feel that a little bit more and the bars might not feel so small. So it's interesting that they included a front load stem instead of a top load stem. And they did this on the Subrosa Salvador park bike. But anyway, I think it's interesting. It's 48mm, so the bars are closer to the frame. It's an 8.5mm rise, so the bars are not actually that much taller. Your stack height remains pretty much unchanged. So now we've got all of the sizing out of the way, all of the geometries. Let's talk about the quality and see if this is a good enough quality bike for you and for the level of riding that you're riding at. The frame is a full chromoly frame. Now it's not a heat treated chromoly frame or it's not an aftermarket frame, but it is full chromoly. Chromoly is much, much stronger than high tensile steel, and this frame is going to last the average rider quite a bit longer than a high tensile steel frame would. The forks are full chromoly forks. So again, a lot of the lower end bikes in Subrosa's lineup are half chromoly with high tensile steel legs. You won't see the issues that you do with those forks on these forks. The legs aren't necessarily going to bend or break. You might get some cracks around the dropouts, but it's pretty unlikely. And these forks are going to last a lot longer than the other forks with high tensile steel legs. The bars are 4-piece handlebars with 9-inch rise. The 4-piece handlebars are going to feel a lot more rigid and a lot more stiff when riding transitions than the 2-piece bars. Generally, these have a bigger impact on your wrists when you're doing drops and stuff, but street riders like the look and the feel of the 4-piece bars, so that's why Subrosa included 4-piece bars on the Letum. This is more of a preference thing. It's mostly about if you like how it looks or not, but this does come with 4-piece bars. You'll have to decide if you like that look or not. The cranks are aftermarket Rant Bang & 8 3-piece chromoly cranks. They're pretty chunky and pretty heavy, but they are technically aftermarket, and overall these are pretty solid cranks. They're just going to weigh a lot. Now the rims are Rant Squad double wall alloy rims with a pin seam. A pin seam means that the rim seam is held together by pins versus the alternative, which is a welding, like a flash welding to hold the seam together. Double wall rims are significantly stronger than single wall rims, and anyone who's riding serious street or weighing over 150 pounds should have double wall rims. So it's good that they included double wall rims. So I'm pretty impressed with all of these components: the full chromoly frame, full chromoly bars, full chromoly forks, double wall rims, aftermarket 8 spline cranks. All of these are the main components of the bike. and these components are the most expensive to replace. So I always feel sad when I see people buy a bike with good aftermarket parts package, but not very good main components, because I just know the days are counting down to when they need to upgrade their frame, their forks, their bars, and those cost $100, $200, $300, $400 to upgrade those parts. And it's really sad to see. So I'd much rather see you guys get a bike like this with the full chromoly main components and not very many aftermarket parts in the parts package, since it's going to be a lot easier and cheaper to upgrade the parts in the part package. So it comes with the Shadow VVS front load stem, which is a front load stem. It's an aftermarket Shadow stem. It's pretty solid. It comes fully sealed bearings, the hubs, the bottom bracket, the headset, all of this is fully sealed. Then it has a Shadow Sabotage 25-2 sprocket with a bash guard. I think it's really cool when brands include bash guard. We the People did this on a lot of their bikes. It just makes the bike that much more street specific and that much more street ready for different grinds. The pegs that it comes with are the LL Cool pegs, and then it has a female front hub, which is just something to mention because the female axles, I think, look cool. They look a lot cleaner, they look a lot more aftermarket and just higher quality. So some of the parts package lowlights are the 410 chain. Unfortunately, they didn't put the Shadow interlock chain on here. I would have been hyped if they did. I think this is a great chain, but they didn't. 410 chain is a lot weaker than a 510 chain or a good quality half link. You don't want to be pedaling high speed. You're going as fast as possible and then have your chain snap. So if you guys are taller guys or you're heavier guys, consider upgrading this chain. It's gonna break pretty quickly. The other thing is the low PSI Shadow Creeper tires. These tires are not necessarily the worst. They have a really good grip pattern and compound, but they're low PSI. So you can't run higher than 60 PSI in them. And for street riding, that's probably not the end of the world. I don't know many people who ride over 60 in street. I ride around 80 in my tires, park, street, whatever, just because I like to have minimal rolling resistance. When you have tires with low PSI, it's a lot of rolling resistance. So you could roll, say, 5 parking spaces, and by the 5th one, you start to slow down. Whereas if you're on tires with a lot of PSI and really low rolling resistance, you'll just keep rolling past number 5 all the way to 10, 12, 18, 24 without slowing down because of that extra PSI, keeping the tires solid and minimizing rolling resistance. Street riders don't care too much about this, but it's just something to point out. All right, so let's talk about the quality and how this bike compares to other bikes. It scored a 7.1 in quality, giving it virtually no weight limit. Because of the main components, the full chromoly frame, forks, bars, double wall rims, full chromoly cranks, I think you'll be okay no matter what your weight is. Now, if you're much over 250, you're gonna probably wanna get aftermarket parts and not these standard full chromoly parts, but you could still get this bike and ride it for a while, and as parts start to break, you can upgrade them. I'm not saying parts are gonna break right away. I'm just saying it's something to keep in mind. Now, if you're 180, 200, 220, this bike's going to be pretty solid for you. Nothing's indestructible. Stuff's going to break anyway, but not as quickly as it would if you were on a quality score 4 bike weighing 180 pounds. This is a decent quality score, and so therefore there's no weight limit. Now keep in mind this no weight limit thing is something from the Dougster Bob algorithm, and from me, it's not from Subrosa. They don't say, hey, this bike doesn't have a weight limit, go crazy. It's just something that I came up with to help you make sure that you're a good fit for the bike. Now, certain bikes are best for certain kinds of riding, and the Subrosa Letum is designed for street riding. It scores an 8 in street, a 4.36 in park, and a 5.38 in dirt. The 8 in street is built up because of the pegs, the hub guards, the bash guard on the sprocket, and a lot of other things that make this bike more specific for street riding. You can make upgrades to it to make it even better for street, or maybe you want to do a little bit of dirt, a little bit of park. This bike's fully upgradable and the sky's really the limit with it. But as it comes right out of the box, it's going to score an 8 in street, making it best for street riding. Now, if you came to me and said, hey, what should I upgrade? The first thing I'd say is that chain. Get rid of that 410 chain and get a 510 chain, or get a Shadow interlock chain. Get something like that that's going to last a lot longer. Snapping a chain is the worst thing ever. The second thing I'd say is the tires. Get some higher PSI tires. These tires that come on the bike are also heavy. So they're low PSI, high rolling resistance, they're heavy. You're going to want to upgrade it with some lighter tires that roll a lot smoother. The third thing I'd I'd say would be the cranks. Since it comes with double wall rims, I think you're good on wheels. It comes with that free coaster, but the cranks, though they're aftermarket Rant cranks, you can get much lighter and much stronger cranks if you were to upgrade them. Now, cranks are pretty expensive, and this would be a long-term upgrade, like something you do later on, not right away. I mean, none of these upgrades you do right away. You just enjoy the bike, you just bought it. But if I was to upgrade it, if I got this bike, these are the first three things I'd upgrade. So I do recommend the Letum quite a bit. I think for people who are looking for a street-specific bike with pegs, with hub guards, with a free coaster, you really can't go wrong with this bike. Being $630, it's a little bit on the expensive side, but I wouldn't call it overpriced. I think it's a fairly decent value bike because of what it comes with and because of how street-specific it is. Scoring an 8 in street is pretty rare to see on a bike this low in price. I'm a little sad that it doesn't come in multiple top tube sizes, and because of this 20.7 5-inch top tube, it limits the amount of people that could ride this bike and that could have fun on this bike doing all the street stuff that it's designed for. So it's really only good for people between 5'9" and 6 foot. Whereas if they had multiple options, it could be good for anybody who wanted a good street specific bike. The Subrosa Malum is a mid-level BMX bike from Subrosa. It features full chromoly pretty much everywhere that you need chromoly and a handful of aftermarket parts. We're going to go super in-depth about this bike. I'll tell you everything that you need to know about it, and it might get a little boring because I'm going to hit all the details. So let's get right into it. So I get a bunch of questions about this bike, and one of the most common ones is how much does it weigh? And this bike's going to weigh 26.2 pounds. The next question is how much does it cost? It's a $660 BMX bike as of right now. So sometimes the prices have been changing throughout 2021 and throughout 2020, but as of right now, it's $660. Can you upgrade it? So yeah, one of the cool things about the Malum and most mid-level BMX bikes like this is that they're fully upgradable. You can put on different handlebars, different forks, different cranks, different pedals, different wheels, tires, whatever you want, you can pretty much replace on this bike without any headache. Does it have any pegs? No, the Subrosa Malum doesn't come with pegs. It doesn't come with hub guards. You can buy universal pegs and universal hub guards and throw them on this bike if grinding's your thing, but out of the box, it doesn't come with any of that. The next question is, what options does it have? This bike only comes in a 21-inch top tube, and it comes in 2 color options. You need to choose between a matte trans teal and a black. As for the gearing, it comes with a Rant Party-On sealed cassette, right-hand drive with a 9-tooth driver. This is going to make the gearing system 25/9. So now we need to talk about the sizing of this bike and make sure that this is the right size for you. Getting the wrong size bike, I promise it's going to make your life a lot harder. It's going to make progression a lot harder, so it's just much better to get the right size. And like I said, this bike comes in a 21-inch top tube, which makes it best for riders who are over 6 feet. Now, if you're absurdly tall, if you're like 7 foot or 6'8", 6'9", you probably want to get a 22-inch bike or something bigger in general. But for the most part, most people aren't that tall. So over 6 foot, this bike will be good for you. If you have a BBB, a big bike background, you ride mountain bikes, you ride dirt bikes, you're used to bigger bikes, you could get this bike if you're 5'9" and up, since the 21-inch will feel more comfortable for you since you've been riding bigger bikes. Now, in that frame geometry, top tube is just only one thing that's talked about there. You want to consider head tube angle, chainstay length, standover height, bottom bracket height, to figure out how the bike's going to affect your style. It's not nearly as important as top tube size, but it is important to look at and consider because it's going to affect your style and how the bike feels. The head tube angle on the Subrosa Malum is 75 degrees. This is right in the middle of the two extremes of head tube angles that we normally see. 76 degree head tube angle steep. This brings the front wheel closer to the back wheel, giving you a shorter wheelbase, making the bike feel more responsive and more snappy, while a 74 or a 74.5 degree head tube angle pulls the front wheel away from the back wheel, giving you a longer wheelbase and making the bike more mellow and more controlled. The 75 degree head tube angle on the Malum is right in the middle, so you're not going to have to worry about that. The next thing is the 9-inch standover height. For the most part, 9-inch standover is average. That's what most complete BMX bikes are. They're right around that 9-inch mark. If you get a smaller standover height, your seat's going to be naturally lower unless you raise it, and it clears more room for no-footed cans, tail whips, and just feet tricks, while your taller standover height puts the seat up higher in your legs so that you can pinch it easier for bar spins or grab the seat for toboggans. It's a little bit more of a preference thing, and it goes towards your style. Now, the chainstay length is 13.2 inches. And with a 13.2 inch chainstay, that means your back wheel on center of the chainstay is 13.2 inches from the bottom bracket. And when you have a longer chainstay, it's doing the same thing as a mellow head tube angle, increasing that wheelbase and giving you more of a mellow and controlled feeling bike. So 13.2 inches is a little bit, for me, my frame of reference is 13. I say 13 is average, and then so anything longer than 13 is a longer chainstay, anything shorter is a responsive chainstay. And so 13.2 is technically on the longer side, which makes it a good fit for riders who are over 6 foot riding this 21-inch BMX bike. For a really tall rider, like someone like me who's 6'4", this 13.2 might feel almost too short. The bike might pick up too fast for manuals. It might feel too responsive, especially if you're inexperienced on the bike. Just a heads up, something to think about. Now, the bottom bracket height is 11.6 inches, which means that from the ground to the center of the bottom bracket, it's 11.6 inches up. When your bottom bracket's lower, your bike feels more stable, your feet are closer to the ground, it's going to feel like a scooter, while if the bottom bracket is higher, like 11.7, it's going to feel really responsive and really snappy. So 11.6 is right there in the middle of the two. You're not going to have to worry about it one way or another. Now, there are parts that go on this bike that also affect your style and affect the handling of the bike. The first one is going to be the forks. The forks have an offset of 30 millimeters, which means from the center of the fork leg, the front wheel bolts on 30 millimeters out. And just like the head tube angle, the farther away your front wheel is from your back wheel, the more wheelbase you have and the more mellow and controlled your bike is. So this 30 millimeters on the longer side. One of the longest forks you can get is 32. So this puts it as a more mellow feeling offset. Now, when you get your fork closer, like a 13 millimeter offset, your front wheel is pretty much right under you, and you have a shorter wheelbase, so you have really responsive steering. Nose manuals are easy to pop into, but this bike has a longer offset, so it's going to feel a little bit more stable. The handlebars are 9 inches tall, which is an average thing. A lot of people are riding 9 to 10 inch handlebars right now. On complete bikes, most complete bikes are going to come with 9-inch handlebars. Now, when you think about this bike being for people who are over 6 foot, the 9-inch handlebar seems a little bit small to me. So you might want to consider upgrading to 9.5 or 10-inch bars. I'm really tall and I ride 9.25. I don't ride super tall bars, but I ride a top load stem that gives me some extra reach and forks with a taller stack height, so my bars are naturally taller. This bike won't necessarily do that. So if you feel hunched over, consider upgrading just because these bars are only 9 inches. The crank arms are 170 millimeters long. And what the length of your crank arm does is it's either a shorter crank arm gives you a shorter diameter when your cranks spin around, which makes your pedaling come around quicker. It gives you less leverage on the cranks. Longer crank arms give you more leverage on the cranks, but a larger diameter. So your legs travel a little bit more when you're doing a full pedal on a longer crank arm. 170 is dead in the middle. You can get up to 180. You can get down to 160. So 170 is right in the middle. And again, just like the lower handlebars, for a taller rider, this might feel a little bit uncomfortable. For someone over 6 foot, they generally want 175 or a 180 millimeter crank arms. And the 170 might feel weird. So just like the bars, if you feel a little off when you're pedaling, something doesn't feel right, consider getting longer cranks. I'll talk about it in a minute, but these are 8-spline cranks. They're full chromoly, but they're heavy and chunky. And so this might be a good excuse to buy some aftermarket 48 spline cranks. So now we know how the geometry is, how this bike's going to feel. Let's talk about the quality and if this is a good enough quality bike for you, or maybe it's overkill. We're going to talk about the main components, which are the frame, forks, handlebars, cranks, and wheels. These are the most expensive parts to upgrade. So you want to make sure that these are solid because you don't want your main components breaking, because upgrading them is very very expensive. It's a lot cheaper to replace junky pedals than it is a junky frame. All right, so the frame on the Malum is a full chromoly frame. It's not heat treated, it's not double butted, but it's full chromoly, which is the minimum requirement for a mid-level bike. The forks are also full chromoly forks. The bars are full chromoly 2-piece bars. The cranks are full chromoly 8-spline cranks, like I mentioned. Nothing really wrong with these except for the fact that they're pretty heavy. And the wheels are double wall Rant Squad with a pinned seam. A pinned seam is the weaker option for melding, I guess, the rim together. The most expensive option is a welded seam. You'll only find a welded seam on high-end aftermarket or high-end Sunday completes or high-end We the People completes. Pretty much really high-end bikes will come with the welded seam. It's not very common on complete bikes. And the pin seam for most riders is more than enough as long as the rim's double wall. Now, the parts package that this bike comes with is pretty solid. I was impressed to see that it came with the Shadow Surface pedals, which are aftermarket Shadow pedals, the Subrosa Rose top load stem. So I talked about it earlier that I ride a top load because it gives you a little bit of extra rise. This is great. It comes with fully sealed bearings, bottom bracket, headset, wheels, everything's fully sealed. That means the bearings are going to last a lot longer than if they were unsealed. It comes with the Shadow VVS 25 tooth sprocket. This is a CNC alloy sprocket. It's lightweight, it's strong, it's much better than the steel sprockets that you'll find on the lower quality Subrosa bikes. And then it comes with the Shadow Interlock V2 half-link chain. I love this chain. This is the chain that I ride personally. It's lasted forever. And it's a good chain. So a lot of the bikes previous to this one come with a cheap 410 chain that's going to snap on you pretty quickly. This chain will probably last you forever, and it's like a $60 chain, which is crazy, but it lasts forever. So if you get this, you don't have to worry about snapping your chain and hitting your knee on there, and that's a big plus. Now, some of the lowlights is that it doesn't come with any pegs or hub guards. For the most part, everything on the bike is solid, but the one downfall that I found is not coming with pegs and hub guards, only because I feel like it wouldn't be hard for them to include at least 2 pegs and hub guards. But now if you want pegs and hub guards to grind, you've got to spend $40 to $80 on them, and that's a lot of money. So because of that quality, the main components, the parts package, this bike scores a 7.2 in quality. And this is out of 10. So a 7.2 out of 10 is not bad. It's actually pretty impressive for a $660 bike. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But 7.2 quality is good. This puts it up there with the Kink Whip and the Subrosa Letum in terms of quality. Now, because of that quality, there's not necessarily a weight limit. Some of the lower quality bikes, I put a weight limit on there. I say, hey, don't get this if you're over this weight. But because of this, I don't think there's really a weight limit. You know, you're over 200 pounds, this bike's going to hold up for you. It's not going to break as quickly as a bike with a 4 quality score, for example. This is a solid bike, 7.2 quality score, no weight limit. Now, everybody rides their bike on different obstacles, and some bikes are better for certain things than others. The Subrosa Malum is going to be best for riding dirt and pump tracks and a little bit of park, but it scores highest in dirt. So it scores a 3.78 in street, it scores a 4.62 in park, and it scores a 6.15 in dirt. Now, these scores are made up by the Dougster Bob app, which is on the Google Play Store, the App Store, and there's a really complex algorithm that calculates these things based on the information about the bike. So it scores highest in dirt. It's going to be best for dirt riding. Now, like I said, everything is fully upgradable. So if you want to ride park on it, you just need to make some park-specific upgrades, and then you've got a bike that scores better for park. You can just make some street upgrades, hub guards, free coaster, pegs, and this bike will be better for street. But as it comes right out of the box, it's a 6.15 in dirt. Now, if someone came to me and said, what should I upgrade on the Malum? I would say, well, you should probably upgrade and get pegs and hub guards if that's something that's important to you. But since it doesn't come with pegs and hub guards, you might want to consider it. At least have 2 pegs on so you can learn double pegs or learn feebles or peg stalls or whatever. If you're riding dirt, I guess you don't need pegs, but if you're not, you need pegs. The second thing would be cranks. I mentioned these are the Rant Bang & 8 cranks, which are fine, full chromoly. They're going to last for you. And they're just going to be heavy, and they're not nearly as good as 48 spline cranks. 48 spline cranks are expensive, so be prepared to spend a good amount of money if you decide to purchase some. So overall, I do like the Malum. Before, I'd kind of put it in the same box as the Subrosa Letum, and I take back all the bad things I said about the Malum. The Letum, here's the thing. The Letum is a little bit cheaper than the Malum, and it comes with pegs, hub guards, and a sprocket with a bash guard. And when you look at that, you're like, well, what the hell? This is the same quality essentially, and it's got all these extra things added onto it. But then you look a little bit deeper, like I did in this video, and you see this has the interlock chain, it has a better stem, better sprocket, it has a lot of good things on it that kind of set it apart and make up for the lack of the pegs and the hub guards. So I do say this is a little bit higher quality than the Letum, but the core components are the same. The main components, the most expensive parts to upgrade, are about the same, and that's where the quality score really comes into play. So you could get this bike and add pegs and hub guards and a bash guard for your sprocket, or you could get the Letum and upgrade the chain and different things to make it like the Malum. It's really up to you, but the crazy thing is the geometries, for the most part, are the same. So there's not a huge difference in these bikes except for the parts package. One has pegs and hub guards and one has some better aftermarket parts. Now we're talking about the Malum, we're not talking about the Letum, but usually people get confused and look at the Malum or the Letum and they're like, well, which one's better? Like, what do I do? And that's the main difference. I just wanted to run you through that. So if you're not too concerned about the street specific stuff, the free coaster, the pegs, the hub guards, then the Malum is going to be a better choice quality wise. If you really want to ride street and you really want to focus on that kind of riding, the Letum is going to be a much better option because it comes with that stuff right out of the box. But I don't have anything bad to say about the Malum per se. It's on the more expensive side. The value score is not a 10, but it's still a decently good value score, and it's definitely not a ripoff. So I'd recommend the Malum for a handful of people. If this showed up on your recommendation, like it's Dougster Bob approved, it's a solid bike. Okay, so that's the Subrosa Malum. Let's talk about the most expensive bike in Subrosa's lineup, the Subrosa Novus. So the Subrosa Novus is the most expensive bike in Subrosa's lineup. This bike is pretty high quality, but to be honest, I think it's quite a bit overpriced. It rivals the Kink Williams in terms of quality, but costs like $500 more. It's insane. Now, some people might love it because of it's the 10-year anniversary, the nostalgia, the way it looks, that it's Subrosa. I don't know, but for me, it's a little bit overpriced. I'm going to get really in depth about it. We're going to talk about everything you need to know about this bike. So I get 5 common questions about this bike. The first one is, how much does this bike weigh? It's going to weigh 25.9 pounds. How much does it cost? Well, the Subrosa Novus is going to cost about $1,200 as of right now. That price can change quite a bit. It can go up, it can go down. So the link in the description is updated regularly to make sure that you go to the place that has this bike for the best price. Can you upgrade this bike? Yes. For the most part, a lot of the parts on here are aftermarket, so they've already been upgraded in a sense. But if you hate the bars, you can replace the bars. If you hate the cranks, you can replace the cranks. Everything's going to be replaceable on here so that you can suit it more to fit your style and your geometry preference and things like that. Does it come with any pegs? No. I don't know why there's a $1,200 bike running around without any pegs or any hub guards, but the Novus does not come with any of those. Now you can buy some separately and upgrade them and put them on this bike. It's not going to be an issue. But I think for that much money, they can include some hub guards and some pegs. You know, that doesn't seem like too much to ask. Does it have brakes? So you might see in the picture of this bike, it's pictured brakeless, as a lot of bikes are. Brakes are included with it. It's illegal not to. They're just standard Rant U brakes. There's nothing special about them. They've got a straight cable. The frame has holes drilled for gyro tabs, so you can put a gyro on here if you want to. And the brake hardware is removable. So you need hardware to mount the brakes onto the frame. This hardware is completely removable. You can take it off and have a nice clean brakeless look if you take the brakes off, but it does come with brakes. Does it come with any options? No, this bike's only available in a 21-inch top tube with a black color option. There's no other options. You can't get it in a smaller top tube. You can't get it in a different color unless you paint it yourself. That's the only option you got. Gearing info, this is a shadow symbol cassette hub with its right-hand drive, and it's a 9-tooth driver, so it's fully sealed. It's an aftermarket hub, and the gearing system is going to be 25.9. Now we need to talk about the sizing of this bike and make sure that this bike's going to properly fit you. If you get the wrong size BMX bike, I promise your life's going to be tough. It's very hard to progress with the wrong BMX bike, and I don't want that to happen to you. So this bike comes in 21-inch top tube, like I said, and that's going to make it for riders who are 6 foot. If you're 6 foot and up, you're going to be comfortable riding this 21-inch top tube. If you're smaller than that, I'd only recommend it to you if you have a big bike background. If you ride mountain bikes, if you ride dirt bikes and you're used to the feel of a bigger bike, you can ride this bike comfortably if you're 5'9" and up. Now, if you're absurdly tall, you might want to get a 22-inch bike instead of a 20-inch bike. But for the most part, the general recommendation is over 6 foot, and this bike will feel good for you. Now, keep in mind, this is a recommendation. This isn't set in stone. You can get this bike if you're 5 foot, but I promise you, getting the wrong top tube size makes progression way harder than it should be. So please consider following the recommendation and getting the proper top tube size. The top tube of a bike is the most important geometry, but you got to look at other things. You got to look at head tube angle, standover height, chainstay, bottom bracket height. Those don't have as big of an impact as the top tube length does, but they have an impact on how your bike feels, the style of it, and things like that. So let's talk about the geometry of this frame. It comes with a 75-degree head tube angle. Now, a steep head tube angle would be like 76 degrees, and this brings the front wheel closer to the back wheel, giving you a shorter wheelbase and making the bike more responsive. A longer head tube angle or a more mellow head tube angle is like 74, 74.5 degrees, and this brings the front wheel farther away from the back wheel, giving you a more stable and a more controlled feel. The head tube angle here is 75 degrees, which is right in the middle. It's not going to affect your style too much one way or another. The standover height is 9 inches. For the most part, this is average. With a tall standover height, you get your seat up closer to your knees or above your knees. This makes it easier to pinch for bar spins and grab for toboggans. A lower standover height gets your seat lower. This is preferred on park-specific bikes because it makes tail whips easier. There's more room for your feet to clear over on no-footed cans and tricks like that. It's more of a preference thing, but the 9 inches that the Novus comes with is pretty standard. The chainstay length is 13.2 inches. Your chainstay is how far your back wheel is from your bottom bracket. And my frame of reference is 13-inch chainstay is average. So a 13.2, a 13.5 is a long chainstay, and a 12.75 or a 12.5 is a short chainstay. So 13.2 is technically on the longer end, but I think it pairs very well with this 21-inch top tube and riders who are over 6 feet, because if you're taller, this chainstay being technically longer is probably what you want. Now, keep in mind, with a longer chainstay, it's going to make it harder to pull back and initiate manuals, while a shorter chainstay gives you that really responsive, snappy back end. The bottom bracket height is 11.6 inches. 11.5 is low. It's close to the ground. It makes the bike feel more stable and controlled. 11.7 is high. It's higher up off the ground. It's going to feel really snappy and really responsive. So 11.6 is right in the middle, and it's really not going to affect your riding one way or another. Geometries on the other parts are also important to be looked at. Again, they're not as important as the top tube length, but they're just as important as the other geometries on the frame, since they're going to affect how this bike feels and it's going to affect your style. The first one we need to talk about is fork offset. This is how far your front wheel is from the center of the fork leg. Again, just like the head tube angle, the farther away your front wheel is from your back wheel gives you that longer wheelbase and a more stable feeling bike. So 27 millimeters is closer to the middle. The frame of reference here is 26 is middle because 32 millimeters is the longest you can get, while 13 millimeters is the shortest you can get. So when you get a shorter offset, you get a more snappy and responsive steering since your front wheel is not raked out so far. It also makes it easier to pop into nose manuals, but a little bit harder to control. If you're inexperienced with BMX, getting a really short offset might make the bike feel uncontrollable. So just keep that in mind. This isn't a really short at in today's standards. It's average, so you don't have to worry about it too much. Just know that it's 3 millimeters shorter than the other Subrosa bikes. The bars on this bike have a 9-inch rise, which To me, with this bike being recommended for people over 6 foot, this 9-inch rise is relatively low. You might have some discomfort, you feel hunched over, so if that's the case, you'll want to upgrade these to 9.5 or something a little bit bigger. The next thing is your crank arm length. The longer your crank arms are, the bigger the circle is that you're making when you pedal, so you've got more movement in your legs. The shorter your crank arms are, the smaller your circles are, so you've got less movement. 170 is right in the middle. You can get 180 millimeter, you can get 160 millimeter, so 170 is right in the middle, which is a bit odd for a bigger rider. I'd imagine they'd put 175 or 180 millimeter on this bike since it is designed for people over 6 foot. The stem has a 51 millimeter reach with a 27 millimeter rise. The reach of your stem is how far your bars are from the center of your forks, and a longer reach gives you a more stable and controlled steering response, while a shorter reach gives you a more snappy and responsive steering response. If your stem reach is shorter, bars are going to be technically easier, and that rise is how high up your bars are from the center of the stem. Getting a taller rise feels more comfortable, and it can offset those 9-inch handlebars that I talked about being small. It might not feel that bad with this 27 millimeter rise. So that's pretty much everything you need to know about the geometry. Now we need to talk about the quality and talk about how good this bike is and if it's good enough for you or if it's way too much for you. You'd expect to see a heat-treated, double-butted aftermarket frame for this price tag, but it's not. It's just a full chromoly standard frame, but it does have a double-butted top tube and double-butted down tube. It's not near the quality as an aftermarket frame, but it's not terrible. It's full chromoly. It has the butted tubing. That's okay. The forks are aftermarket Subrosa Simo forks. They have the one-piece steer tube. They're heat treated. These are good forks. Aftermarket stuff is always the best. And where these are all main components, I think it's especially important to get the best quality you can afford, because these parts are expensive to replace. The bars are not aftermarket, but they're full chromoly 2-piece handlebars with the 9-inch rise that we talked about. The cranks are Subrosa Big Bitchin' cranks. They're 48 spline cranks with that 170 millimeter crank arm length. 48 spline cranks are a lot lighter and a lot stronger than the 8 spline alternative, and these are aftermarket, so they're actually really good cranks. They're going to last quite a while. The rims are Shadow Truss rims. They're double walled with a welded seam. The welded seam is much better than a pin seam that you'll see, but honestly, for just a mid-level rider, you don't need a welded seam. It's overkill. For a pro-level rider, you definitely want the welded seam. And what I'm getting at is that these rims are going to outlast most people who buy this bike. These are very good rims. They're well put together. So some of the highlights on this bike are the Subrosa Barcelona 25 tooth sprocket. This is an aftermarket sprocket. The Shadow Tremone stem is a CNC stem. It's an aftermarket stem. It's light, it's strong, it's very solid. Everything on this bike is fully sealed. It has a pivotal seat post combo, which you'd expect to see on most bikes, but you don't. They're usually one-piece seat post seat tube combos, so having this pivotal seat post combo means the seat and the seat post are aftermarket, which really isn't a big deal, but I thought it was cool and wanted to point it out. The next thing is the Shadow Interlock V2 half-link chain. This is the chain I ride. This is an incredible chain. It's gonna last for you. A lot of the other bikes come with the 410 chain, which will snap very easily. This one, you don't have to worry about it. It's gonna last, so you're good. Even if you're a heavy rider, this bike's solid because of the chain. The things that disappointed me about this bike is that it doesn't come with any pegs or any hub guards. I don't think it would have been hard for them to throw in 2 pegs and 2 hub guards for this price tag. And the other thing is the low PSI Shadow Strata tires. They're just the cheaper version of these aftermarket tires. And again, on a $1,200 bike that can include aftermarket high PSI tires, but oh well. So because of all those things that make up that quality, this bike got a 7.6 quality score. I'm a little bit disappointed by it because of the price tag. It's a good score. 7.6 out of 10 is good for most mid-level riders, for most people, but you can get this same quality by spending a lot less. It doesn't make any sense to me. But because of the 7.6 quality score, there's not necessarily a weight limit for this bike. People over 200 pounds will be just fine on this, and you'll be much better off on a bike like this than you would be on a bike that has like a 4 quality score. So no weight limit on the bike. This is a weight limit from me and the Dougster Bob app. It's just something that's calculated in there. It's not something from Subrosa. It's something that I designed to protect people from getting bikes that are too weak from them and getting hurt. So no weight limit on the bike. Some bikes are designed for certain types of riding, and it all depends on the geometries and the way that the bikes are designed. This bike is best for dirt-specific riding, which is kind of a shocker. It scored a 5.56 in street, a 5.36 in park, and a 5.9 in dirt. So overall, everything is pretty close together, but the dirt score is going to be the highest. You can make upgrades to this bike. It's fully upgradable. I already mentioned that. And what I'm getting at is that you can upgrade this bike now to be more dirt specific, more park specific, more street specific, depending on the upgrades you do to it. Make it better for the type of riding. So if you're really not sure what kind of riding you enjoy doing, this bike is, in a sense, they're all so close together that you can get it, you can ride a little bit of everything, and then you can make upgrades to better suit your style. Scores best for dirt. Right out of the box, it's best for dirt riding, but not by much. So if someone said, hey, I just got this bike, what should I upgrade? I'd tell them the first thing you want to upgrade is the pegs and the hub guards. You need pegs, you need hub guards, at least 2 of them, unless you're riding dirt. But you should hop on, you should grind around, and that was one of the most disappointing things about the bike. I'd recommend getting those first. Next, I'd recommend grabbing some new bars. Since the forks are fully aftermarket, it'll be nice to complement them with aftermarket handlebars instead of just the 2-piece chromoly bars that come on this bike. The third thing I'd say is upgrade the tires. These tires are the low PSI, so you're going to get high rolling resistance, and they're also pretty heavy. You can buy lighter tires that will affect the weight of this bike. It'll probably get it down under 25 pounds if you upgrade to good Kevlar folding tires. This bike didn't have a price tag. If I didn't know what the price was, I'd say, wow, this is a pretty decent quality bike. I'm impressed by some of the parts on the parts package and so on and so forth. But because of this price tag, I just can't recommend it it'll show up on some recommendations because I need a third bike, but it's the third option. It's like you're at school, everyone's picking teams and you're the last one picked. That's what this is when it shows up on the recommendation. If everything else is sold out and you have the money laying around, it's not a bad bike. It's just severely overpriced, and that's just my thoughts on it. Now, let me know in the comments which bike I should review next. YouTube thinks that the video right here on the screen is a great video for you to watch, and we'll see you in the next video. Thank you.